The first thing Rowan Mercer noticed that morning was the silence, not the peaceful kind that settled over Iron Ridge Ranch during the deep winter months when snow muffled everything and the world felt wrapped in cotton. This was different, heavier, the kind of quiet that crawled up your spine and whispered that something fundamental had shifted while you weren't paying attention. He stood in the hallway outside Clara's nursery, one hand pressed flat against the doorframe, listening. Nothing. No crying, no small coughs, no rustling of blankets as she shifted in her crib, just the ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs and the wind scraping ice against the windows. 7 months old, and his daughter had been sick for 3 weeks. "Mr. Mercer." "Sir?" Rowan turned. Silas Boone stood at the top of the stairs, dressed as always in clean work clothes that somehow never seemed to gather dust or horse smell despite a full day managing the ranch. 42 years old, silver threading through dark hair, shoulders still broad enough to throw a calf. Rowan had known him for 15 years, trusted him with every operational decision on the property, considered him closer than most blood relatives. "Dr. Crow says you shouldn't disturb her," Silas said quietly. "Rest is what she needs most right now. She's been resting for 3 weeks. Healing takes time." Silas moved closer, lowering his voice further. "I know this is hard, but the doctor knows what he's doing." Rowan looked back at the closed door. "When I was a boy, my mother used to say that silence in a sick room was either recovery or surrender. I don't hear recovery in there. You're exhausted. When's the last time you slept properly? When's the last time my daughter was well enough to cry?" Silas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood there in that patient way of his, radiating calm competence. It was one of the things Rowan had always valued about his foreman. Nothing rattled him. Not spooked cattle, not failed crops, not the hard business decisions that came with running 12,000 acres. Silas absorbed problems and produced solutions. "Dr. Crow will be here this afternoon for his daily visit," Silas said finally. "You can ask him directly about her progress. I ask him every day. And he gives you the same answer because it's the truth. Infants are delicate, frontier winters are brutal. She caught something in her lungs and it's taking time to clear." Silas gestured toward the stairs. "Come down. Breakfast is ready. You need to eat." Rowan didn't move. His hand remained pressed against the doorframe, fingers spread like he was trying to feel his daughter's heartbeat through the wood. Lenora would know what to do. The words hung in the hallway. Silas's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Sympathy, maybe, or discomfort. Hard to tell in the dim winter light. "Lenora's gone," Silas said softly. "I'm sorry, but you can't help Clara by torturing yourself. They never found her body." "Rowan." 8 weeks. They searched for 8 weeks and found nothing except her horse wandering near the ridge. The blizzard came down hard that night. You know what the wilderness does to... Silas stopped himself, shook his head. "This doesn't help anyone, not you, not Clara. Your daughter needs you focused on her recovery, not chasing ghosts through a dead investigation." Rowan turned away from the nursery door, finally meeting his foreman's eyes directly. "You think I'm losing my grip. I think you're grieving and scared. Both reasonable. Both dangerous if you let them cloud your judgment. My judgment tells me something's wrong in that room. Your judgment is being strangled by fear." Silas's voice remained gentle, but firm. "Trust Dr. Crow. Trust the process. Trust that good care takes time." Before Rowan could respond, footsteps sounded from downstairs. The housekeeper, Mrs. Calloway, moving through the front rooms. A door opened and closed. Voices drifted up, muffled by distance. Silas glanced toward the stairs. "Someone's here. I'll see to it." He descended with the easy confidence of a man who belonged everywhere he walked. Rowan listened to his boots on the wooden steps, steady and measured, then looked back at Clara's door. 3 weeks ago, she'd been laughing, making those bubbling sounds that infants make when they're discovering their own voice. Lenora had been gone only a week then, and Rowan had clung to his daughter like a lifeline, terrified of losing the only family he had left. Then came the cough. Just small at first, barely noticeable. Dr. Crow had examined her, prescribed some medicine, recommended keeping the room warm. Standard winter precautions for a baby. But the cough had deepened. Clara's appetite had faded. Her eyes, so bright and curious before, had grown dull and distant. And now this silence that felt less like sleep and more like slow surrender. Rowan pressed his palm against the nursery door, feeling the smooth wood under his skin. "I'm here, sweetheart," he whispered. "Papa's right here." No answer. Just that terrible, suffocating quiet. Downstairs, the visitor turned out to be a woman Rowan had never seen before. She stood in the entrance hall shaking snow from a heavy coat that had seen better years, boots leaving wet prints on Mrs. Calloway's clean floor. Maybe 35, maybe 40, hard to tell with frontier women who'd spent years in sun and wind. Dark hair pulled back severe from a face that looked carved from something harder than patience. She carried a worn leather satchel and moved with the kind of economy that came from traveling rough country alone. "Can I help you?" Rowan asked from the stairs. The woman looked up. Her eyes were the color of creek stones, gray and sharp. "Rowan Mercer?" "That's right." "My name's Tessa Vale. I need to talk to you about your wife." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Silas moved forward from where he'd been standing near the parlor door, positioning himself between Rowan and the stranger with unconscious protectiveness. "Mrs. Mercer's death is a painful subject," Silas said smoothly. "Unless you have official business, I'd ask you to—" "I didn't say she was dead." Tessa's gaze never left Rowan's face. "I said I need to talk about her." Rowan descended the rest of the stairs slowly. "You know something about Lenora?" "I know she came to see me 6 weeks before she disappeared. I know she asked questions about medicine and babies and men who profit from grief. And I know she left something with me for safekeeping." Tessa reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. She said if anything happened to her, I should bring this directly to you, nobody else. She unfolded the cloth. Lenora's wedding ring sat in her palm, gold catching the weak winter light through the windows. Rowan's legs went numb. He'd searched Lenora's belongings a dozen times after she vanished, looking for any clue about where she'd gone or why. The missing ring had haunted him, one more piece of his wife erased from the world. "Where did you get that?" His voice came out rough. "I told you, she left it with me." "That's not possible." Silas stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "Lenora wore that ring every day. She wouldn't have taken it off willingly. You're right about that." Tessa closed her fingers around the ring, protective. "Which should tell you something about how serious she was when she came to my door." Rowan tried to speak, couldn't. The world had narrowed to that small fist holding his wife's ring, the last physical proof that she'd existed outside his memories and grief. Mrs. Calloway cleared her throat from the parlor doorway. "Shall I prepare tea?" "No." Silas's tone held an edge now, the first crack in his usual composure. "Miss Vale was just leaving." "I'll leave when Mr. Mercer tells me to." Tessa finally looked at the foreman directly, and something cold passed between them. "Or do you make all his decisions?" "I protect his interests, which includes keeping opportunists away during a difficult time." "Opportunist?" Tessa's laugh had no humor in it. "You think I rode 3 days through blizzard country to sell a man his own wife's ring? That's some long-game swindle." "Then what do you want?" "To talk, privately." She turned back to Rowan. "Your wife trusted me with information that could get people killed. Still might, actually. But she made me promise that if she didn't come back, I'd make sure you knew the truth." Rowan found his voice finally. "What truth? Not here. Not with—" Tessa glanced around the entrance hall, at Mrs. Calloway hovering near the parlor, at Silas standing rigid with barely contained hostility. "Too many ears. Somewhere we can speak freely." Silas moved between them again. "Rowan, this is obviously some kind of scheme. Don't let grief make you vulnerable to—" "My study." Rowan's words cut through the foreman's objection. "We'll talk there." "That's a mistake." "Then it's my mistake to make." Rowan met his foreman's eyes, seeing concern there, genuine worry, it seemed, but also something else, something that looked almost like fear. "Wait here, Silas. I'll call if I need you." For a moment he thought Silas might refuse. The foreman's jaw tightened, muscles working beneath skin like he was physically restraining himself from argument. Then he stepped aside with visible effort. "As you wish, but I'll be right outside that door." Rowan led Tessa down the hall to his study, feeling Silas's stare burning into his back with every step. The study was cold. Rowan's hands shook slightly as he built up the fire, adding logs until flames caught and spread heat into the book-lined room. Tessa stood near the window, looking out at the snow-buried ranch with an expression he couldn't read. "Your wife loved this place," she said quietly. Talked about it like it was alive somehow, the way the light hit the ridge at sunrise, how the grass smelled after rain. "You spoke with her often?" "3 times. First visit was just medical. I'm a healer, work mostly with ranch families and miners who can't afford fancy doctors. She came asking about winter illnesses in infants, what symptoms to watch for, what treatments actually worked versus what was just wishful thinking dressed up as medicine." Rowan lowered himself into the chair behind his desk. Lenora was always careful about Clara's health. More than careful, desperate. Tessa turned from the window. She'd heard things. Rumors about babies dying across the territory under strange circumstances. Always during winter, always under a doctor's care, always in families with significant property or inheritance disputes. What kind of rumors? The kind people whisper about but never pursue. Frontier justice gets messy when you start accusing respected professionals of murder. Tessa walked to the desk, placed Lenora's ring carefully on the polished wood between them. She came back 2 more times, brought notes, questions, names, asked me about medicines that could look like natural illness, about how long someone could make a baby sick without killing them outright, about whether a person could profit from a child's death if that child stood between them and money. The fire crackled. Outside, wind drove snow against the window in soft whispers. "That's insane," Rowan said. "Is it?" Tessa leaned forward. 3 months before Clara was born, a rancher named Thomas Webb died. Left everything to his infant grandson. 2 months later, that baby got sick. Lingering illness, lots of medicine, doctor in attendance every day. Baby died just before his first birthday. Property got divided among Webb's business partners. Babies die in winter. It's tragic, but 5 months ago, cattle baron named Morrison passed away. Left his holdings to his daughter's 6-month-old son. That baby's sick right now. Has been for weeks, under doctor's care. Tessa's eyes were steady, unflinching. Same doctor who's treating Clara, actually, Dr. Elias Crow. Rowan's blood went cold. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm telling you what your wife discovered. She spent weeks tracking these cases, finding patterns, connecting names. Tessa pulled a folded paper from her satchel, spread it on the desk. This is what she gave me the last time I saw her, 2 days before she disappeared. The paper showed a rough map of the territory with locations marked. Next to each mark, notes in Lenora's handwriting. Webb baby, died February 1889. Morrison baby, sick, November 1889. Patterson twins, died March 1888. Cordell infant, died December 1887. And at the bottom, underlined 3 times, check land transfers, check partnerships, check SB. SB, Rowan whispered. Your wife wouldn't tell me who that was, said knowing could make me a target. Tessa tapped the paper. But she said this person was the center of everything, not the doctor. The doctor was just a tool. This SB was the one who orchestrated it all. Rowan's mind raced. The initials could be anyone. Samuel Brennan, who ran the bank. Stephen Bartlett, who owned half the mining claims in the territory. Solomon Black, the territorial judge. Or Silas Boone. No. Impossible. Silas had been his friend for 15 years, had helped build Iron Ridge from nothing, had stood beside him at his wedding, had been the first person to hold Clara after Lenora gave birth. Silas would never. But he's been here every day since Clara got sick, a small voice whispered in his mind. Managing everything, keeping you calm, making sure you follow doctor's orders, making sure you don't ask too many questions. I can see you working through it, Tessa said. The disbelief, the loyalty, the little moments that suddenly look different when you view them through a darker lens. Your wife went through the same process, took her weeks to accept what the evidence kept showing her. Why didn't she come to me? She tried. You weren't listening. Tessa's voice wasn't cruel, just factual. You were focused on the ranch, on the cattle contracts, on whatever business your foreman kept bringing to your attention. She said you trusted Silas completely, that you'd never believe ill of him without absolute proof. So she went looking for proof. and found enough to scare her into hiding that ring and everything else she'd collected. Tessa refolded the map carefully. The night she disappeared, she was riding to meet someone who claimed to have documents proving financial connections between the dead babies and land transfers. She never made it. Rowan's throat felt tight. You think someone killed her? I think your wife knew too much, and someone made sure she couldn't tell anyone. Tessa straightened. And I think Clara's illness isn't an accident or bad luck or unfortunate winter sickness. I think she's being murdered slowly by people you trust, and you're standing outside her door letting it happen. The words hit like physical blows. Rowan stood abruptly, chair scraping against floor. Get out! Mr. Mercer. You come into my home, call my friend a murderer, tell me I'm helping kill my own daughter? His voice cracked. Get out before I have you thrown out. Tessa didn't move. That baby upstairs is dying. You know it. I can hear it in your voice when you talk about the silence in her room. Whatever's happening in there isn't medicine. It's slow poison dressed up as care. Dr. Crow is a respected physician. He's treated half the families in the territory. Yes. And some of those families buried their children. Tessa picked up Lenora's ring, held it out. Your wife knew the truth would sound insane. She knew you wouldn't want to believe it, but she also knew that if she didn't come back, Clara would be next. So she left this with me, along with instructions. Tell Rowan to check the medicine. Tell him to watch who handles Clara's food. Tell him to look at Silas Boone's financial records for the past 5 years. Silas has nothing to do with... Then prove me wrong. Tessa set the ring down deliberately. Let me see your daughter. Let me examine her myself. If I'm lying, if I'm wrong, you can throw me off your property and I'll never bother you again. But if I'm right... She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Rowan stared at the ring on his desk, gold circle that Lenora had worn every day of their marriage. She'd been wearing it at their wedding, wearing it when she'd first held Clara, wearing it the last morning he'd seen her alive, when she'd kissed him goodbye and said she had business in town. Not business. A meeting. With someone who had proof. What kind of healer are you? He asked quietly. The kind who learned from necessity, not medical school. I've set bones, delivered babies, treated fevers and infections, and every frontier ailment you can imagine. I'm not polite about it, and I don't always follow established wisdom, but I keep people breathing. Tessa met his eyes. Your wife came to me because she wanted someone outside the network, someone who wouldn't be loyal to money or reputation, someone who'd tell her the truth even when it was ugly. And what is the truth? That Clara's symptoms don't match any natural illness I've seen in 20 years of frontier medicine, that respected professionals can be bought if the price is right, and that babies make excellent murder victims because everyone assumes they're just fragile. Rowan closed his eyes. Exhaustion pressed down on him like a physical weight. He'd barely slept since Clara got sick, spending nights pacing the hallway outside her room, listening for changes in her breathing. The terror of losing her had consumed him so completely that he'd surrendered all decisions to people who claimed to know better. Dr. Crow had said not to disturb her. Silas had said to trust the process. Mrs. Calloway had said healing took time, and Clara had grown quieter each day. If you're wrong, Rowan said slowly, if you're lying or deluded or running some long game I can't see yet, then you'll know soon enough. But if I'm right and you do nothing, your daughter will be dead by next week. Tessa picked up her satchel. I'll need to see her room, her medicine, everything the doctor prescribed. And I'll need you to trust me over every instinct that's telling you I'm insane. That's asking a lot. Your wife asked for more. She asked me to save her daughter if she couldn't. Tessa moved toward the door. I'm trying to keep that promise. Question is whether you'll let me. Rowan looked at the ring one more time, remembering how Lenora's hands had looked wearing it. Strong hands, capable hands, hands that had held their daughter with such fierce protectiveness. She knew, he thought. She figured it out and tried to stop it, and they killed her for it. One chance, he said. You examine Clara, tell me what you find, and if any of this is real, we'll figure out what to do next. And if Silas objects, then we'll know you're right about more than just the medicine. Tessa nodded once, satisfied. She opened the study door and stepped into the hallway. Silas stood exactly where he'd been before, like a guard dog maintaining position. His eyes went immediately to Tessa, then to Rowan, calculating. Everything all right? The foreman's tone was carefully neutral. Miss Vale will be examining Clara, Rowan said. Silas's expression froze. That's not wise. Dr. Crow specifically said, I know what he said, but Miss Vale is a healer, and I want a second opinion. From a... Silas searched for words, settled on something diplomatic. A frontier medicine woman? Rowan, be reasonable. Dr. Crow trained in Boston. He's treated governors and senators. You can't seriously... I can and I am. Rowan moved into the hallway, standing beside Tessa in what he recognized as a declaration. Unless you have a reason she shouldn't see my daughter. The silence stretched thin and dangerous. Silas's jaw worked like he was chewing through a dozen responses, discarding each one. Finally, he stepped back, hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Of course not. I'm just concerned about upsetting established treatment, but she's your daughter, your decision. He looked at Tessa with something colder than professional courtesy. I hope you know what you're doing. I usually do, Tessa said. They climbed the stairs in tense formation, Rowan leading, Tessa behind him, Silas following last like he couldn't quite leave them unsupervised. The hallway felt longer than usual. Each step toward Clara's room weighted with significance that Rowan didn't fully understand yet. His hand hesitated on the nursery door handle. Whatever you see in there, he said to Tessa, tell me the truth. Don't soften it. I never do. He opened the door. The first thing that hit him was the heat. The room felt like a furnace, air thick and stifling despite the winter cold outside. Heavy curtains blocked all natural light, leaving only a small lamp burning near the crib. The smell was wrong, too. Too much camphor, too much laudanum, too much of something sweet and medicinal that coated the back of his throat. Clara lay in her crib, wrapped in blankets despite the heat. Her face looked waxy in the lamplight, skin too pale, breathing too shallow. A medicine bottle sat on the small table nearby, along with a spoon and a cloth for wiping her mouth. Tessa moved forward immediately, hands already reaching for the blankets. Silas started to object. Dr. Crow said not to disturb, but Rowan silenced him with a look. The healer pulled back layers of fabric, revealing Clara's tiny form underneath. The baby didn't wake, didn't react at all to being uncovered, just lay there breathing in small, labored gasps. Tessa pressed fingers to Clara's neck, checking her pulse. Then she lifted one of the baby's eyelids, peering at the pupil beneath. Her expression grew darker with each passing second. How long has she been this unresponsive? Tessa asked. 3 days, Rowan said. Dr. Crow said it was normal. That deep sleep helped healing. And this medicine? Tessa picked up the bottle, read the label. How often does she get it? Every 4 hours, Dr. Crow's specific instructions. Tessa unstoppered the bottle, smelled the contents. Her face went hard as stone. This isn't medicine. This is poison. That's absurd. Silas moved forward. Dr. Crow prescribed laudanum, yes, but at a dose that would knock out a full-grown man, let alone a 7-month-old baby. Tessa set the bottle down carefully, like it might explode. Combined with the heat, the lack of stimulation, the forced sleep, you're not treating an illness. You're suffocating her body's ability to fight. Dr. Crow knows what he's doing, Silas insisted. He's a trained physician, not some what? Tessa turned on him. Some frontier woman who's spent 20 years keeping children alive through methods that don't involve slow poisoning? You're out of line. Am I? Because this baby's been medicated into a coma, overheated to the point of dehydration, and isolated from any stimulation that might wake her system up. That's not care. That's murder stretched out over weeks. Rowan's legs felt weak. He gripped the crib rail, staring down at his daughter's still form. Can you help her? Maybe. If we act fast. Tessa was already moving, stripping away more blankets, opening the curtains to let cold air and light flood the room. First thing, no more of that medicine. Second, we need to cool her down and get fluids in her. Third, we need to make her uncomfortable enough that her body remembers how to fight. That sounds barbaric, Silas said. It's called survival. Pretty sure your Boston-trained doctor never spent a winter in mining camps watching mothers battle pneumonia with nothing but hot water and determination. Tessa scooped Clara up, the baby's head lolling against her shoulder. This child's been trained to be docile. We need to wake her up before there's nothing left to wake. She carried Clara to the window, letting cold air wash over both of them. The baby didn't stir, didn't cry, just hung there in Tessa's arms like a doll that had forgotten how to be alive. Rowan, this is insane. Silas's voice carried real urgency now. You're going to let some stranger undo weeks of professional care based on wild accusations? Those accusations came from Lenora. Rowan met his foreman's eyes directly. My wife, who spent weeks researching dead babies and land transfers before she disappeared. Silas went very still. What are you talking about? SB, Rowan said quietly. Lenora marked that name in her notes, said it was connected to everything. The sick babies, the property transfers, the pattern of deaths. And you think, Silas's laugh sounded forced, you think that refers to me? Because of initials. Rowan, there are dozens of SBS in the territory. Samuel Brennan, Stephen, I know, which is why I'm not accusing you of anything. Yet. Rowan turned back to Tessa and Clara. But I'm going to let Miss Vale try to save my daughter. And if that upsets Dr. Crow's treatment plan, so be it. Dr. Crow will have you arrested for child endangerment. Then he can explain to a judge why his medicine looks like poison and his care routine looks like suffocation. Tessa glanced over her shoulder, something almost like approval in her expression. Then she turned back to Clara, fingers working with practiced efficiency. I need clean water, cool cloths, and honey if you have it. Also a dropper or something I can use to get fluids into her mouth. I'll fetch what you need, Rowan said. You'll do no such thing. Silas blocked the doorway. This is madness. You're going to kill that baby based on paranoid fantasies and frontier superstition. Move! Rowan, listen to me. I said move. Rowan's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. Or I'll move you myself. For a long moment they stood facing each other, 15 years of partnership straining against sudden suspicion. Then Silas stepped aside, jaw tight with barely restrained anger. Don't say I didn't warn you, he said. Rowan pushed past him into the hallway, heading for the stairs. Behind him he heard Tessa talking to Clara in low, steady tones. Not baby talk, but real conversation, like she was trying to remind the infant that language existed, that the world existed beyond drugged sleep. Mrs. Calloway startled when Rowan burst into the kitchen, already reaching for supplies. Sir. Clean water, cool cloths, honey, now. Is something wrong with... Just get them. She moved quickly, sensing the urgency in his tone. Within minutes, she'd assembled everything on a tray, hands shaking slightly as she worked. Rowan grabbed the tray and headed back upstairs, taking steps two at a time. He found Tessa sitting in the rocking chair near the window, Clara cradled against her chest. The baby was still unconscious, but Tessa had positioned her upright, head supported, letting gravity help drain any fluid from her lungs. Set it there. Tessa nodded toward the side table. Rowan placed the tray down, then stood helpless, watching the healer work. Tessa dipped a cloth in cool water, wrung it out, and pressed it against Clara's forehead. The baby's skin was hot to the touch, flushed with fever that had been masked by the overheated room. Talk to her, Tessa said. What? Talk to your daughter. Let her hear your voice. Right now she's living in a fog of drugs and silence. We need to pull her back toward consciousness. Rowan knelt beside the rocking chair, close enough to see Clara's face clearly. Her eyes were closed, eyelids fluttering occasionally like she was dreaming, or trying to wake up, or both. Hey, sweetheart, he said softly. It's Papa. I'm right here. Nothing. No response. No sign she'd heard him. Keep going, Tessa encouraged. I'm sorry I let this happen. I should have... His voice cracked. I should have listened better, been more careful. Your mama tried to tell me something was wrong, and I was too busy to hear her. Tessa dipped a dropper into the honey water mixture, brought it to Clara's lips. Open her mouth gently. Rowan used his thumb to part his daughter's lips. They were dry, cracked. Tessa squeezed a few drops of liquid onto Clara's tongue, waited. The baby's throat worked reflexively, swallowing, a tiny response, but real. Again, Tessa said. They repeated the process. More drops, more swallowing. Still no crying, no waking, but the mechanical act of drinking seemed to trigger something deep in Clara's system. Muscle memory, maybe, or just basic biology reasserting itself. Your mama loved you so much, Rowan continued, keeping his voice steady despite the emotion rising in his chest. She spent weeks trying to protect you from something I didn't even know was coming. She was braver than me, smarter, saw danger where I only saw friends. Another dropperful of honey water. Another swallow. But I see it now, sweetheart. I see what's happening, and I'm going to fix it. He touched Clara's hand, feeling how cold her fingers were despite the fever. You just have to hold on a little longer. Can you do that for me? Tessa worked in silence for several minutes, alternating between cool cloths and tiny amounts of fluid, watching Clara's responses like she was reading a language only she understood. Outside, afternoon light began to fade. Winter darkness coming early. Footsteps in the hallway. Dr. Crow's voice raised in alarm. What in heaven's name is going on here? The doctor burst into the nursery, black bag in hand, face flushed with outrage. He looked from Rowan to Tessa to Clara, taking in the open windows, the scattered blankets, the abandoned medicine bottle. Who is this woman? Dr. Crow demanded. And why is my patient being subjected to frontier quackery? Your patient is being saved from your medicine, Tessa said without looking up. I beg your pardon? You heard me. That laudanum dose would kill a grown man. You've been poisoning this baby for weeks. Dr. Crow's face went from flushed to purple. That is slander. I am a trained physician with credentials from Boston. Yes, we've heard. Tessa finally looked at him. Tell me, Dr. Crow, how many of your infant patients have died under similar treatment? The doctor sputtered. Frontier life is harsh. Infant mortality is tragically common. Especially when you're the attending physician, seems like. Tessa stood, still holding Clara. How much did Silas Boone pay you to make sure this baby didn't reach her first birthday? The room went silent. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Dr. Crow's expression cycled through several emotions: shock, offense, fear, before settling on cold professionalism. I don't know what lies you've been fed, but I will not stand here and be accused. Then leave, Rowan said quietly. The doctor turned to him. Excuse me? You're dismissed. Send your bill to the house. We won't be needing your services anymore. Rowan, be reasonable. Silas appeared in the doorway behind Dr. Crow. You're making a terrible mistake based on this woman's wild theories. Am I? Rowan stood, facing both men. Because right now my daughter is more responsive than she's been in days, and the only thing that's changed is stopping your treatment. Coincidence, Dr. Crow insisted. Natural fluctuation in her condition? Bullshit. The word came out flat and hard. I've watched Clara getting worse every day under your care, following every instruction, every dose, every protocol, and she's been dying by degrees while you collected your fees and told me to be patient. This is insanity, Silas said. Rowan, listen to yourself. You're destroying your daughter's chance at recovery because a stranger showed up with conspiracy theories. The stranger has my wife's ring. The ring Lenora left with her along with notes about dead babies and land transfers, and someone with the initials SB who's been orchestrating murders across the territory. Rowan looked at his foreman directly. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Silas? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Silas's face went carefully blank. I think grief has made you paranoid. Maybe. Or maybe Lenora was right, and I was too trusting to see it. Rowan moved to stand beside Tessa, a physical declaration of whose side he'd chosen. Either way, Dr. Crow is done here. And you, Silas, you're going to answer some questions. I don't have to answer anything. Then get off my property. The words hung in the air like smoke. 15 years of partnership, 15 years of trust and shared labor and friendship, all burning down to ash in the space of a single afternoon. Silas looked at Dr. Crow. Some unspoken communication passed between them. Then the foreman turned back to Rowan with an expression that was almost pitying. You're making a serious mistake. Won't be my first. Probably won't be my last. That baby will be dead by morning without proper medical care. Then I guess we'll find out if Dr. Crow's care was proper or poison. Rowan's voice stayed level despite the fury building in his chest. Leave, both of you, now. Dr. Crow drew himself up to full height, radiating professional dignity. I'll be reporting this to the Territorial Medical Board. Child endangerment, interference with treatment, allowing unlicensed, report whatever you want, but do it from somewhere else. The doctor stormed out, boots heavy on the stairs. Silas lingered a moment longer, eyes moving between Rowan and the baby in Tessa's arms. You'll regret this, he said quietly. I already regret trusting you. Silas's jaw tightened. Then he turned and followed Dr. Crow down the stairs. Rowan listened to their footsteps fade, heard the front door slam, heard horses being saddled in the yard below. When silence returned, he realized he was shaking. That took courage, Tessa said. Or stupidity. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. Rowan returned to Clara's side, touching her hand again. Will she really be all right? Don't know yet, but she's got better odds now than she did an hour ago. Tessa settled back in the rocking chair. The next few hours will tell us whether we caught it in time. And if we didn't? Then at least she won't die alone in a drugged stupor, never knowing her father fought for her. It wasn't comfort exactly, but it was honest. Rowan appreciated that more than false promises. They sat together in the cooling nursery as winter darkness fell outside, watching Clara's shallow breathing, listening for changes. Mrs. Calloway brought soup and bread that neither of them touched. The grandfather clock downstairs marked hours with patient indifference. Somewhere around midnight, Clara coughed, a small sound, barely audible. But it broke through the terrible drugged silence that had filled the room for days. Tessa's eyes snapped open. She'd been dozing lightly in the chair, and she adjusted Clara's position immediately. That's it, she murmured. Clear those lungs, sweetheart. Clara coughed again, harder. Her face scrunched up in discomfort. Then for the first time in 3 days, she opened her eyes. Rowan's heart stopped. His daughter looked up at him with confused, watery eyes that didn't quite focus yet, but were definitely seeing, definitely aware, definitely alive in a way she hadn't been since the medicine had taken hold. Clara, he whispered. The baby's face crumpled. Then she started to cry, a weak, raspy sound that was the most beautiful thing Rowan had ever heard. Is that good? He asked frantically. It's perfect. Tessa was grinning now, exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Crying means her lungs are working, means she's got enough energy to be upset about being uncomfortable, means she's fighting. Clara cried harder, tiny fists waving in protest at being cold and confused and awake after days of forced sleep. The sound filled the nursery, loud and demanding and completely, gloriously alive. Rowan started laughing. He couldn't help it. Relief and terror and joy all crashed together into something that came out sounding half mad, but he didn't care. His daughter was crying. She was breathing properly. She was alive and angry and real. Tessa handed Clara over, placing the squalling baby in her father's arms. She'll need to eat soon. Real food, not just honey water, and we'll have to watch her closely for the next few days. Make sure there's no permanent damage from the drugs. But she'll survive? If we keep her away from Dr. Crow's medicine and anyone else who wants her quiet? Tessa nodded. Yeah, she'll survive. Rowan held his daughter against his chest, feeling her heartbeat through the thin nightgown, feeling her breath against his neck. She was so small, so fragile, so utterly dependent on him to make the right choices. He'd failed her once, trusting the wrong people. He wouldn't fail her again. What do we do now? He asked. Tessa moved to the window, looking out at the dark ranch below. Now? Now we figure out who's been killing babies across the territory. We find the proof Lenora died looking for, and we make sure they can't hurt anyone else ever again. That sounds dangerous? It is, but your wife started this fight. Seems only right we finish it for her. Rowan looked down at Clara, who'd stopped crying and was now just breathing heavily, exhausted from the effort of being awake. Her eyes drooped, but it was natural sleep approaching now, not drugged unconsciousness. Healing sleep, real rest. All right, he said quietly. Tell me what you need. Tessa smiled, a hard, determined expression that promised trouble for anyone standing in her way. First, we need to search this house top to bottom. If Silas has been running this operation, there will be evidence somewhere, letters, financial records, something connecting him to the other deaths. And if we find it, then we take it to someone with real authority, someone outside Silas's network. Tessa turned from the window. Your wife mentioned a territorial investigator, a man named Gideon Shaw, said he was one of the few lawmen in the territory who couldn't be bought. Shaw's based 3 days' ride from here. Then we'd better start looking tonight. Rowan nodded slowly. Clara had fallen asleep against his chest, her breathing steady and strong. He could feel her warmth, her weight, her absolute trust that he would keep her safe. Outside, snow began falling again. Fresh powder covering old tracks, hiding secrets under blank white silence. But inside Iron Ridge Ranch, the silence had been broken, and the hunt was just beginning. The search began at 3 in the morning when the house had gone silent, except for the settling of old wood and the whisper of wind through cracks in the windows. Clara slept in Tessa's arms, breathing steady now, color returning to her cheeks with each passing hour. Rowan stood in the doorway of his study, holding an oil lamp that cast jumping shadows across the walls. "Where would he keep it?" Tessa asked quietly from the hallway. "I don't even know what we're looking for." "Anything that connects him to the other families. Letters, contracts, ledgers showing payments to Dr. Crow. Your wife knew what to look for. That's why she spent weeks collecting evidence before someone stopped her." Rowan's jaw tightened at the reminder. Lenora had died. Been killed. He had to start thinking of it that way. Because she'd gotten too close to the truth. And he'd been so wrapped up in ranch business that he hadn't noticed his own wife conducting a murder investigation right under his nose. "Silas has an office in the foreman's quarters," he said, "and access to the ranch safe where I keep important documents. Start with the office. If he's been careful, he won't mix his legitimate work with the conspiracy, but men get sloppy when they think they're untouchable." They moved through the dark house like thieves, Tessa carrying Clara wrapped in fresh blankets, Rowan leading with the lamp. Mrs. Calloway had retired to her rooms hours ago. The grandfather clock marked 3:30 with soft chimes that seemed too loud in the stillness. The foreman's quarters sat separate from the main house, a converted barn space that Silas had transformed into comfortable lodging over the years. Rowan had helped him paint these walls, install the stove, build the desk that dominated the small office area. They'd shared whiskey here on countless winter nights, planning cattle drives and discussing ranch expansion while snow piled up outside. The memory felt like betrayal now. Or maybe it had always been betrayal and Rowan was just seeing it clearly for the first time. The door was locked. Of course it was. Silas was methodical about security. "Can you pick it?" Tessa asked. "I own the property. I can break it." Loud. If anyone's still loyal to Silas on this ranch, they'll come running. Rowan thought about the 23 men who worked Iron Ridge. How many of them answered to him versus his foreman? Silas had been here longer, knew them better, paid them their wages, while Rowan handled the larger business operations. Loyalty was complicated on the frontier, less about ownership and more about who you trusted to keep you fed through hard winters. "There's a spare key," he said finally. "Lenora made me keep one in case of emergency. Said it wasn't safe having only one person able to access important ranch records." Smart woman. Smarter than I gave her credit for. He retrieved the key from its hiding place behind a loose board in the main house, then returned to the foreman's quarters. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo across the whole ranch. Rowan pushed the door wide and stepped inside. Silas's office smelled like leather and tobacco, and the particular scent of paper that had been handled often. Everything was organized with military precision, ledgers stacked by date, contracts filed alphabetically, maps pinned to the walls showing property boundaries and cattle routes. The desk itself was clean, except for a pen set and a small locked drawer built into the right side. Tessa set Clara down gently in a padded chair near the stove, making sure the baby was secure and still sleeping. Then she joined Rowan at the desk. "That drawer," she said, pointing. "I don't have a key for it." "Then we improvise." She pulled a thin blade from her boot, more than a knife, less than a weapon, and worked it into the lock mechanism with practiced efficiency. Rowan watched her hands move, quick and certain, and wondered what kind of life taught a frontier healer to pick locks in the dark. The drawer popped open with a metallic snap. Inside were 3 ledgers bound in dark leather, a stack of letters tied with string, and a small leather pouch that clinked when Rowan lifted it. He opened the pouch and gold coins spilled across the desk, more money than a foreman should have saved from ranch wages. "Count it," Tessa said, already reaching for the letters. Rowan counted. $200 in gold, nearly 2 years' salary for a working foreman. He set the coins aside and picked up the first ledger, opening it to a random page. The entries were written in Silas's precise handwriting, but the content made no immediate sense. Dates, initials, amounts, nothing overtly damning, but nothing that looked like standard ranch accounting either. "What do the letters say?" he asked. Tessa had untied the bundle and was reading by lamplight, her face growing harder with each page. These are from Dr. Crow, coded mostly, but sloppy. He references the web matter being resolved satisfactorily, the Morrison situation requiring patience, and something about payment schedules for extended care services. Could be legitimate medical correspondence. Could be, except this one mentions your wife by name. Tessa held up a letter dated 6 weeks before Lenora disappeared. Crow writes, "The Mercer woman has been asking uncomfortable questions. Recommend accelerating timeline before she connects the pattern. Suggest you handle this personally, rather than waiting for natural opportunity." The words hit like physical blows. Rowan took the letter with shaking hands, reading the casual discussion of his wife's murder dressed up in polite suggestions. Dr. Crow's signature at the bottom, neat and professional, like he was prescribing medicine instead of death. "That bastard," Rowan whispered. "Keep looking. We need more than one letter." They worked in focused silence, Rowan going through the ledgers while Tessa examined the correspondence. Clara stirred once, making small sounds, but settled back into sleep without fully waking. Outside, the first hints of dawn began lightening the eastern sky. The ledgers revealed a pattern once Rowan understood what he was looking at. The initials matched the names on Lenora's map: Webb, Morrison, Patterson, Cordell. Next to each name were dates that corresponded roughly to when those babies had died or fallen ill. And next to those dates were amounts of money that increased based on the size of the inheritance involved. Webb baby, $500. Morrison baby, $750. Patterson twins, $1,000 combined. And at the bottom of the current page, written just 2 weeks ago, Mercer baby, estimated $2,000 upon successful resolution. Clara's life reduced to an accounting entry, a number representing how much Silas stood to gain from her death. Rowan's vision blurred. He set the ledger down carefully before he put his fist through it. "Found something?" Tessa asked. He slid the ledger across the desk without speaking. She read the entries, her expression shifting from anger to something colder and more dangerous. "This connects him to every case Lenora documented," she said, "but it doesn't explain how he profits. Dead babies don't write checks." "No, but grieving parents sell property. Business partners buy out shares, land gets transferred." Rowan opened the second ledger, finding more detailed records. Silas has been purchasing land through third parties. Small parcels, mostly, purchased from families in financial distress after losing a child. The prices are below market value. People desperate for cash after funeral expenses and medical bills don't negotiate hard. He creates the crisis, then profits from the aftermath, and probably has legitimate buyers lined up before the baby even gets sick. Clean transactions, nothing traceable back to him directly. Rowan felt sick. It's brilliant in the worst possible way. It's murder for profit dressed up as frontier tragedy. They continued searching, finding more evidence with each passing minute. A map showing purchased properties, many adjacent to valuable water rights or railroad routes. Correspondence with land speculators discussing future development opportunities. And buried at the bottom of the drawer, a handwritten note in Silas's writing that made everything crystalline clear. Dr. Crow requires reassurance regarding the Mercer situation. Have convinced him that extending the timeline serves our purposes. Slow decline appears more natural than sudden death, reduces scrutiny. Payment to be delivered upon confirmation that the child has passed and property transfer documents are signed. Rowan trusts me completely. He will sell when I suggest it, relocate when I advise it, and never suspect that his own grief is making me wealthy. Rowan read the note 3 times, each word burning itself into his memory. 15 years of friendship reduced to calculated manipulation. Every piece of advice, every comforting word, every moment of shared trust, all of it performance designed to position Silas as the helpful friend who'd support Rowan through tragedy and guide him toward decisions that benefited the foreman's land acquisition schemes. "We have enough," Tessa said quietly. "This plus Lenora's research will convince any honest lawman. If we can find one Silas hasn't bought. Your wife trusted Gideon Shaw. That's good enough for me." Rowan gathered the ledgers, letters, and note, wrapping them carefully in oilcloth from Silas's supply cabinet. Evidence that could hang a man if presented correctly, or get them all killed if Silas discovered what they'd found before they could reach safety. Dawn was breaking properly now, pale winter light washing across the ranch. Clara woke as Tessa lifted her, making small hungry sounds that were achingly normal. "She needs to eat," Tessa said, "and we need to leave, soon. I have to warn the hands. Some of them have families on this property. If Silas comes back with violence, he will come back. Men like that don't surrender territory without a fight." Tessa adjusted Clara in her arms. "Question is whether we'll still be here when he does." Rowan looked around the office one last time, seeing it differently now. Not a workspace, but a hunter's blind where Silas had tracked vulnerable families and calculated profits from their suffering. Every detail that had seemed like organization was actually predation. They returned to the main house as the ranch began waking around them. Rowan found Mrs. Calloway already in the kitchen, starting breakfast preparations. She looked up when they entered, saw Clara awake and alert in Tessa's arms, and her weathered face broke into a genuine smile. "She's better. Much better, thanks to Miss Vale's help." Rowan set the wrapped evidence on the kitchen table. "I need you to do something for me." The housekeeper's smile faded. "You look serious." "It is serious. I need you to pack supplies for travel. Food that'll keep, medical items, warm clothes for Clara. Enough for 3 people for at least 4 days." "You're leaving?" "We have to. There's been—" He stopped, unsure how much to reveal. Mrs. Calloway had worked at Iron Ridge for 8 years. She was loyal and discreet, but she also lived on property that Silas effectively controlled when Rowan wasn't paying attention. "There's trouble coming. I'd rather not be here when it arrives." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind involving Silas Boone and Dr. Crow and things I wish I'd seen months ago." Mrs. Calloway's expression shifted, something knowing entering her eyes. "I wondered." "Wondered what?" "Why Mr. Boone was so insistent about following Dr. Crow's orders exactly. Why he got upset when you wanted to sit with Clara during her worst spells. Why he watched that medicine like it was gold dust." She wiped her hands on her apron. "My sister lost a baby 3 years back, under Dr. Crow's care. Symptoms sounded awful, similar to what Miss Clara was going through." "Why didn't you say something?" "Because I'm a housekeeper, sir, and Mr. Boone pays my wages same as you do. And frontier wisdom says you don't make accusations you can't prove against men with power." She moved toward the pantry. "But I can pack supplies fast and keep my mouth shut about where you've gone." Tessa shifted Clara to one hip. "Your sister. Did she notice anything unusual before her baby got sick?" Her husband had just died. Logging accident. Left her with the baby and a profitable timber claim. Within 2 months, the baby was sick, and within 4, she'd sold the claim and moved back east to live with family. Mrs. Calloway paused, understanding dawning. "That claim got bought by a development company. I remember because the price seemed low even with her needing cash fast." "Did the company have a name?" "Red Hollow Enterprises. Why?" Rowan and Tessa exchanged glances. Red Hollow was the location marked on Lenora's map where she'd planned to meet her source. The same name appearing on Silas's property acquisition records as a buyer of distressed land. "No reason," Rowan lied, "just connecting details." Mrs. Calloway didn't look convinced, but she moved efficiently through the kitchen, pulling supplies from shelves and packing them into saddlebags. Within 20 minutes, she'd assembled enough provisions for a week of hard travel, plus extra blankets and a tin of salve for Clara's skin. "Where will you go?" she asked quietly. "The less you know, the safer you'll be. Mr. Boone will ask questions when he finds you gone. Tell him the truth. You woke up and we were already packed and leaving. You don't know where or why." Rowan touched her shoulder. "And Mrs. Calloway? When this is over, when it's safe, I'll make sure you're taken care of, you and your sister both." She nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Just keep that baby safe. Her mama would have wanted that. Her mama died trying to do exactly that." They left through this kitchen door as the ranch came fully alive around them. Rowan could see hands moving toward the barns for morning chores, smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney, the ordinary rhythms of ranch life continuing as if the world hadn't tilted on its axis overnight. The stables were quiet. Rowan saddled 3 horses, his own mare, a steady gelding for Tessa, and a gentle pack horse for supplies. Clara watched the proceedings with wide eyes, alert now and curious about her surroundings in a way she hadn't been for weeks. "Can she travel?" Rowan asked as he secured the saddlebags. "Better than staying here waiting for Silas to realize what you've found." Tessa had fashioned a sling that would let her carry Clara securely against her chest while riding. I've moved sick children through worse conditions than this. That's not exactly reassuring. Wasn't meant to be reassuring. Was meant to be true. They mounted up as the sun cleared the eastern ridge, painting the snow-covered ranch in shades of gold and amber. Beautiful country, Rowan thought. Deadly country, too, when you weren't watching for the right threats. They'd made it maybe 300 yards from the main house when a shout went up behind them. "Mr. Mercer!" Rowan turned in the saddle. One of the younger hands, Tommy Brennan, was running from the bunkhouse waving his arms. "Hold up," Rowan told Tessa. The boy reached them breathing hard, face red from cold and exertion. "You riding out?" "Ranch business. Why?" "Mr. Boone came by earlier, before dawn. Told us to watch for you leaving and to stop you if you tried." Rowan's hand moved toward the rifle secured to his saddle. "And are you planning to stop me, Tommy?" The boy shook his head quickly. "No, sir. But I figured you should know he's been talking to the men, saying you've gone unstable with grief, that the woman traveling with you is filling your head with dangerous nonsense, that you might be putting Miss Clara at risk." "And what do the men think?" Tommy glanced back toward the bunkhouse where other hands were emerging, attracted by the commotion. "Most of them are loyal to Mr. Boone. He's the one who handles their concerns, settles their disputes, makes sure they're paid on time. You're the owner, but he's the one they see every day." "How many?" "Maybe 15 out of 20 would follow his orders over yours. The rest are uncertain." Which meant they were riding away from a ranch where most of the workforce had been turned against them by a man who'd spent 15 years building loyalty while Rowan focused on larger business matters. Another brilliant move by Silas. Control the workers, control the property, control the narrative. "Tommy, why are you telling me this?" The boy shuffled his feet. "Because my ma died in childbirth when I was 10. Dr. Crow was attending her. Said it was natural causes, nothing anyone could have done. But I remember Mr. Boone visiting our house a lot in the months before, talking to my pa about selling the homestead claim, about how hard it would be to raise a baby alone, about opportunities in California that sounded awful convenient." He met Rowan's eyes. 3 months after Ma died, Pa sold out and moved us west. Mr. Boone's development company bought the land. Utras. You never said anything. Wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound like a kid making up stories because he missed his ma. Tommy looked at Clara, sleeping peacefully in Tessa's sling. "But if you're running from Mr. Boone, I figure there's a reason, and I figured you should know what you're up against." Rowan reached into his coat and pulled out a small pouch of coins. Emergency money he always kept on him. "Take this. When Silas comes looking, tell him we rode north toward the mining camps. Give him a good story about me seeming confused and the woman being persuasive." "Where are you really going?" "Like I said to Mrs. Calloway, the less you know, the safer you'll be." He pressed the coins into Tommy's hand. "But I appreciate the warning. When this is over, there'll be a place for you at Iron Ridge if you want it." The boy nodded and stepped back. Rowan turned his mare toward the eastern trail, away from the northern route he'd just claimed to be taking, and urged her into a canter. Tessa followed, one hand steadying Clara, the other controlling her reins with practiced ease. They rode hard for 2 hours, putting distance between themselves and Iron Ridge Ranch, while the sun climbed higher and burned off the morning frost. The trail wound through pine forest and across frozen streams, following routes that Rowan knew from years of riding the property boundaries. Around mid-morning, they stopped to rest the horses and let Tessa nurse Clara. The baby drank greedily, making happy sounds that seemed almost defiant after days of drugged silence. Color had fully returned to her cheeks. Her eyes tracked movement with alert interest. "She's resilient," Tessa said, adjusting Clara's blankets. "Another day or two under Crow's care and we might have lost her completely, but she's fighting now. Like her mother. Lenora must have been formidable." "She was." Rowan stared back the way they'd come, watching for pursuit. "I didn't appreciate it enough when she was alive. Thought I was protecting her by handling the dangerous aspects of ranch business. Never occurred to me she might be protecting me by investigating things I was too blind to see. Guilt's natural, but it won't help anyone if it slows you down." "Is that frontier wisdom?" "That's survival wisdom." Tessa settled Claire into the sling again. "We've got maybe half a day's lead on Silas. Less if he figures out Tommy lied about your direction. The longer we sit here wallowing, the more that lead shrinks. They mounted up and continued east, pushing deeper into wilderness country where the trails grew rougher and civilization became increasingly theoretical. This was territory Rowan knew from hunting trips and boundary surveys. Beautiful in a harsh way, unforgiving to anyone unprepared for its realities. By afternoon, they'd reached Red Hollow, the narrow ravine where Lenora had supposedly been heading the night she disappeared. The place existed as a natural crossroads, several trails converging near a wooden bridge that spanned a gorge, carved by centuries of snowmelt and rain. Tessa pulled her horse up short, studying the geography. "This where your wife was going?" According to her last conversation with Mrs. Calloway, she said she had a meeting with someone who had documents proving the connection between Silas and the land transfers. She never made it. No. They found her horse wandering loose 3 miles from here. No sign of Lenora, no sign of struggle, nothing but an empty saddle and questions. Tessa dismounted and walked toward the ravine edge, looking down into the gorge below. The drop was maybe 60 feet to a boulder-strewn stream bed that would kill anything that fell into it. Perfect spot for making a murder look like an accident, spook the horse, rider falls, tragedy explained by dangerous terrain, and bad luck. Someone was waiting for her, Tessa said. Someone who knew she'd be riding this trail at night. The person who sent her the message about having proof, or the person who wanted to make sure she never got that proof. Tessa turned from the edge. Your foreman's good at this. Sets traps that look like natural circumstances. No obvious violence, nothing to raise immediate suspicion. Until my wife started connecting the pattern, and even then he tried the slow route, discredit her quietly, make her seem unstable, eventually arrange an accident that everyone would accept as frontier tragedy. Tessa remounted. But she moved faster than he expected, gathered evidence, hid it with someone outside his network, forced him to act directly. They crossed the bridge, wooden planks creaking under the horse's weight. On the far side, Rowan spotted something that made him pull up short. A scrap of fabric caught on a bush near the trail, faded now but still recognizable as the same blue wool of Lenora's riding coat. He dismounted and retrieved it carefully, holding the small piece of cloth like a religious artifact. Physical proof that his wife had made it this far, that she'd been here at the crossroads before something or someone had stopped her from reaching her destination. Rowan, Tessa's voice carried warning. He looked up. 3 riders were approaching from the western trail, moving at a steady pace that suggested purpose rather than casual travel. Even at distance, Rowan recognized the lead horse, Silas's black gelding, distinctive for the white blaze running down its face. He found us fast, Tessa said. Probably never believed Tommy's story about us riding north. Rowan remounted, assessing options. The eastern trail continued into rougher country with limited routes. North and south offered some alternatives, but nothing that wouldn't leave them exposed. And going back west meant riding directly at Silas. We can't outrun them, Tessa said. Not with a baby and pack horse. Then we don't run. Rowan urged his mare forward toward a cluster of rocks near the eastern trail entrance that would provide some cover. We see what he wants. He wants you dead and that evidence destroyed. Maybe. Or maybe he still thinks he can talk his way out of this. Silas always preferred manipulation over direct violence. Rowan drew his rifle from its saddle scabbard. Either way, I'm not giving him Clara without a fight. They positioned themselves behind the rocks, horses secured out of immediate sight, weapons ready. Clara had fallen asleep again, exhausted from her first active day in weeks. Tessa held her with one arm, her other hand resting on a pistol tucked into her belt. Silas approached the bridge and stopped, sitting his horse calmly while scanning the area. The 2 men with him were ranch hands Rowan recognized, Frank Dutton and Carl Webb, both longtime employees loyal to the foreman. Rowan, Silas called out. I know you're nearby, saw your tracks on the bridge. Rowan didn't answer immediately. Let Silas wonder. Let him worry. I'm alone except for Frank and Carl, Silas continued. Just here to talk. No violence, no threats. You have my word. Your word doesn't mean much anymore, Sid, Rowan finally responded, staying behind cover. Silas nodded like he'd expected that response. I suppose it doesn't, but hear me out anyway, for old time's sake, if nothing else. Old times when you were planning to murder my daughter? Is that what that woman told you? That I'm some kind of monster preying on babies? Silas's tone carried genuine-sounding hurt. Rowan, think about what you're saying. I've known you for 15 years. Helped you build this ranch from nothing. Why would I suddenly turn into a child killer? Money, land, opportunity. Rowan shifted position slightly, keeping his rifle pointed toward the mounted men. Found your ledgers, Silas. Read your correspondence with Dr. Crow. Saw the accounting that valued my daughter's life at $2,000. Silas went very still. Several seconds passed in silence, broken only by wind through the ravine and the soft gurgle of water far below. That's unfortunate, he said finally. Unfortunate that I found it? Or unfortunate that you kept such careful records? Both, I suppose. Silas's facade of friendly concern cracked, revealing something colder underneath. Though I kept records because I'm not actually a monster, Rowan. I'm a businessman, and businessmen document their transactions. Transactions? That's what you call murdering children? I call it market correction. The frontier is full of people who inherit property they can't manage properly. Babies who'll grow up to squander valuable land on sentiment and poor decisions. I simply accelerate natural selection and ensure resources end up in capable hands. Tessa made a sound of disgust. Capable hands meaning yours, meaning people who understand that frontier development requires hard choices. Silas's eyes found Tessa in her hiding spot. You must be the healer, the one who's been filling Rowan's head with conspiracy theories. I didn't have to fill anything. Your own records made the case. Circumstantial evidence misinterpreted by amateurs. Silas returned his attention to Rowan. You're making a serious mistake. That woman is dangerous. She poisoned your wife's mind with paranoid fantasies, and now she's doing the same to you. Lenora figured it out on her own, Rowan said. Tessa just finished what my wife started. Your wife was unstable. Grief does terrible things to rational thinking. She wasn't grieving yet. Clara was healthy when Lenora started investigating. Was she, though? Silas leaned forward in his saddle. You were so busy with ranch operations, you barely noticed Lenora's increasing paranoia. The late-night rides, the secret meetings, the obsession with tragedies that had nothing to do with your family. She was spiraling, Rowan. Anyone could see it. Except the only tragedy that mattered was the one you orchestrated. I orchestrated nothing. Dr. Crow provided legitimate medical care. If that care occasionally failed, well, frontier medicine is imperfect. Children die. It's sad but inevitable. Not this many children, not all connected to your land purchases. Silas smiled, and it was the coldest expression Rowan had ever seen on his old friend's face. Prove it. Take your stolen ledgers to a territorial judge and see what happens. I'll testify that you've been unstable since Lenora's death. Dr. Crow will confirm that you interfered with proper medical treatment. Half the ranch hands will swear you've been acting erratically. And when your daughter dies because you replace professional care with frontier superstition, you'll hang for it. She's not going to die, Tessa said firmly. Give her back to Dr. Crow for 2 days and we'll see about that. Silas's tone shifted, becoming almost reasonable. Here's what happens next. You hand over those ledgers and any other evidence you've collected. You return to Iron Ridge with me and resume Dr. Crow's care for Clara. And in exchange, I'll make sure you're allowed to grieve your daughter's eventual death in peace instead of facing charges for her murder. You're insane if you think I'll agree to that. I'm practical, and I'm offering you a way out that doesn't end with you in prison and your daughter in a grave. Silas gestured at the wilderness around them. You're 3 days from the nearest town with real law enforcement. You're traveling with a woman wanted for practicing medicine without credentials. And you're carrying a sick baby through winter country. How long do you think you'll last? Rowan glanced at Tessa, saw his own uncertainty reflected in her expression. Silas was right about the practical difficulties. They were fugitives now, whether they'd chosen it or not. And without the territorial investigators' intervention, they had no clear path to justice. But they also had evidence, proof that could hang Silas if presented to the right authority. We're going to Gideon Shaw, Rowan said. He'll listen to the truth. Shaw? Silas actually laughed. Shaw's investigating a murder case 3 territories away. Even if you reach him, even if he believes you, it'll be weeks before he can act. And by then Clara will be dead and I'll have disappeared your precious evidence so thoroughly you'll never find it again. Then I guess we'd better ride fast. Rowan fired a shot over Silas's head, not to kill, but to punctuate the conversation's end. The sound echoed through the ravine like thunder. The horses shied. Silas fighting to control his mount while Frank and Carl reached for their weapons. "Next one won't miss," Rowan warned. Silas steadied his horse, eyes blazing with genuine anger now. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Good. You murdered my wife and tried to kill my daughter. Hard seems appropriate. Your wife died because she couldn't leave well enough alone. Don't make the same mistake." "The mistake was trusting you." Rowan backed toward where Tessa was already mounting up, Clara secure in her sling. 15 years I considered you a friend. 15 years you were planning how to profit from my family's death. I was planning how to ensure this ranch thrived, instead of crumbling under sentimental management." Silas's mask had fully dropped now, revealing the calculating predator underneath. "You're a mediocre rancher, Rowan. Good heart, weak execution. Without my management, this property would have failed years ago. All I wanted was fair compensation for my efforts." Fair compensation doesn't involve murdering babies. It does when those babies represent opportunities too valuable to waste on incompetent heirs. The casual admission hung in the cold air between them. Even Frank and Carl looked uncomfortable now, finally understanding the depth of their employer's crimes. Rowan swung into his saddle, keeping his rifle trained on the three mounted men. "Stay back, Silas. I don't want to kill you, but I will if you force me." "You won't make it to Shaw. These mountains will kill you before I have to." "Then I guess that's another risk I'm willing to take." They rode hard into the gathering afternoon, pushing the horses as much as they dared while Silas's voice echoed behind them, making promises and threats that blurred together into white noise. The chase had begun in earnest now, and winter was coming down hard. The temperature dropped 15 degrees by nightfall. Rowan could feel it in his bones, that particular cold that came before heavy snow. They'd been riding for 8 hours straight, changing pace to save the horses, but never stopping long enough to be caught. Clara had stayed quiet through most of it, alternating between sleep and wide-eyed alertness as Tessa kept her warm against her chest. "We need shelter," Tessa said as darkness thickened around them. "Another hour in this cold, and the baby's recovery won't matter." Rowan scanned the landscape, what little he could see of it. They'd climbed into hill country where pine forests gave way to exposed rock faces and scattered stands of aspen. Beautiful in summer, deadly in winter. He knew these mountains had abandoned mining camps scattered through them, relics from the silver boom that had gone bust 5 years back. Problem was remembering which valleys held shelter versus which held nothing but collapsed tunnels and broken dreams. "There's an old camp near Widow's Creek," he said finally, "maybe 3 miles northeast. Last I heard it still had a standing bunkhouse." 3 miles in the dark? "You have a better option?" Tessa didn't answer, which was answer enough. They turned their exhausted horses toward what Rowan hoped was northeast and pushed on through gathering darkness. Behind them, somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard other horses. Could have been echo, could have been imagination, could have been Silas and however many men he'd gathered. No way to know without stopping to listen properly, and stopping meant losing whatever lead they still had. Clara started crying around the 2-mile mark. Not the weak, sick sounds from before, but genuine hungry baby crying that cut through the wind like a saw. Tessa tried soothing her, tried offering water from a canteen, but Clara wanted milk and warmth and probably a dry diaper, none of which they could provide while moving through frozen wilderness in the dark. "I have to stop," Tessa said. "Just for a few minutes. We're close." She's screaming loud enough to guide anyone within a mile straight to us. Rowan knew she was right, but the thought of stopping now, this close to shelter, made his chest tight with anxiety. Still, Clara's cries were getting more desperate, and a baby couldn't understand that danger was chasing them through the mountains. He found a spot where rock overhangs created a small windbreak, and they dismounted, Tessa immediately working to calm Clara while Rowan kept watch on the trail behind them. The baby's cries echoed off stone, seeming to come from everywhere at once, terrible for stealth, perfect for broadcasting their location to anyone listening. "Hurry," Rowan said unnecessarily. Tessa shot him a look that suggested he try nursing a screaming infant in sub-zero temperatures while being hunted by murderers if he thought he could do better. Then she focused on Clara, getting her fed and changed with efficiency born from years of frontier medicine where everything happened under less than ideal circumstances. The crying stopped. Blessed silence except for wind and the soft sounds of Clara nursing. Rowan's shoulders unknotted slightly. Then he heard it clearly, horses approaching from the southwest. Multiple riders moving at steady pace, close enough now that there was no mistaking the sound for anything else. "We're out of time," he said. Tessa was already repacking. Clara returned to her sling, still eating. They mounted up and pushed the exhausted horses into a trot, following a trail that was barely visible in starlight. Rowan navigated by memory and instinct, praying he wasn't leading them off a cliff or into a dead-end canyon. The mining camp materialized out of darkness like a ghost. 3 buildings still standing, barely. The bunkhouse Rowan remembered, a collapsed equipment shed, and something that might have been an office before weather destroyed half its roof. Not much, but better than dying of exposure in the open. They rode straight for the bunkhouse and dismounted, Rowan kicking the door open while Tessa got Clara and the essential supplies inside. The interior was dark and smelled like rot and animal dens, but it was enclosed space out of the wind. "Get a fire started," Tessa said. "Small one, low smoke. A fire will give away our position. So will freezing to death." She was already arranging blankets in the driest corner, creating a nest for Clara. "We need heat for the baby, unless you'd rather explain to your dead wife why you let her daughter die of cold after saving her from poison." The words hit hard, but they were true. Rowan gathered wood from the collapsed shed, finding pieces dry enough to burn with minimal smoke. His hand shook as he struck flint, partly from cold and partly from the adrenaline that had been keeping him functional for the past 12 hours. The fire caught. Small flames, carefully managed, providing just enough warmth to make the bunkhouse livable. Clara had finished nursing and was making small content sounds, her earlier distress forgotten. Tessa checked her temperature, felt her pulse, examined her with the focused attention of someone who understood how quickly frontier children could slip from healthy to dying. "She's holding up better than expected," Tessa said quietly. "Resilient. Like Lenora, like both her parents, probably." Tessa settled Clara into the blanket nest, making sure she was secure and warm. "You should rest too. I'll take first watch." "I can't sleep." "You can and you will, or you'll be useless when we need to move again." Tessa positioned herself near the door with her pistol in hand. 2 hours. Then you take over and I'll sleep. We maintain that rotation until dawn." Rowan wanted to argue, but exhaustion was catching up fast now that they'd stopped moving. He found a relatively dry section of floor near the fire and lowered himself down, every muscle protesting. When had he last slept properly? 2 days ago? 3? Time had become elastic, measured in crises rather than hours. He closed his eyes for what felt like seconds. When he opened them again, Tessa was shaking his shoulder, and the quality of darkness outside had changed in ways that suggested several hours had passed. "Your turn," she whispered. "Nothing yet, but I heard horses maybe an hour ago. Distant, could have been heading a different direction." Rowan sat up, head foggy. Clara was sleeping peacefully in her nest, breathing steady and regular. The fire had burned down to coals that provided warmth without much light. "Get some rest," he told Tessa. She didn't argue, just traded places with him, and was asleep within minutes. The kind of instant unconsciousness that came from years of grabbing rest whenever opportunity allowed. Rowan positioned himself where he could see both the door and the small window, rifle across his knees. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving snow that had started falling while he slept. He could hear it hissing against the walls, accumulating on the roof, slowly burying the mining camp under fresh powder. Good for hiding their tracks, bad for traveling when dawn came. He thought about Silas out there somewhere, probably holed up in better shelter with more men and better supplies. The foreman had always been prepared, always thinking 3 moves ahead. That's what made him dangerous. Not physical strength or quick violence, but the patient calculation that turned trust into weapons and friendship into leverage. How many times had Rowan asked Silas's advice on important decisions? How many ranch policies had been shaped by the foreman's suggestions? How much of Iron Ridge's success had been built on Silas, positioning himself as indispensable while slowly taking control of everything that mattered? And Lenora had seen it. Somehow she'd noticed the pattern that Rowan had missed, connected the deaths that looked random until you mapped them against land transfers and inheritance disputes. She'd spent weeks collecting evidence while Rowan focused on cattle contracts and property expansion, never suspecting that his most trusted advisor was orchestrating murders. The guilt was like physical weight. If he'd listened to her, if he'd paid attention when she tried to discuss her concerns, if he'd been less dismissive of what probably sounded like wild conspiracy theories, Clara made a small sound, pulling him out of the spiral. She was stirring in her blankets, not quite awake, but restless. Rowan moved quietly to her side, touching her forehead to check for fever. Cool skin, healthy temperature. She opened her eyes briefly, saw him, and made a contented noise before drifting back to sleep. Such a small thing. Such a fragile life. Worth $2,000 to a man who saw human beings as obstacles to profit. Rowan returned to his position by the door, jaw tight with anger that had nowhere productive to go. Yet. Dawn came slowly, gray light seeping through gaps in the walls. Tessa woke on her own, instantly alert in that way soldiers and frontier survivors learned. She checked Clara first, then the fire, then their position. Still snowing, she observed. Has been for hours. At least 6 inches accumulated. Makes tracking harder. Makes everything harder. Rowan stood, working stiffness out of his legs. We have maybe 4 hours of decent travel before the horses give out completely. After that, we're on foot. How far to the nearest town? Depends which direction we go. Southwest takes us back toward settled territory, but that's where Silas will expect us to head. Northeast goes deeper into the mountains. Harder traveling, but fewer people who might be loyal to him. And the territorial investigator? Shaw's last known location was Blackwater Station. 3 days hard ride northeast, assuming we can maintain pace through mountain passes in winter. Rowan moved to the window, scanning what little he could see through falling snow. It's a gamble. Everything's a gamble at this point. Tessa was packing supplies methodically. Question is which gamble has the best odds? Clara woke fully and started crying, hungry again. While Tessa handled that, Rowan saddled the horses and loaded the pack animal. The gelding he'd chosen for Tessa looked worn but still functional. His own mare was showing strain around her eyes. That look horses got when they'd been pushed too hard for too long. The pack horse was the worst off, stumbling slightly when Rowan led it from the shelter, favoring its right front leg. We need to leave the pack horse, he said when Tessa emerged with Clara. It won't make another day. That's half our supplies. Better than losing the whole animal and having to redistribute weight to horses that are already struggling. They transferred essential items to their saddlebags, abandoning the rest in the bunkhouse. Anyone who found this place later would know they'd been here, but that couldn't be helped. Survival required hard choices. They were mounted and ready to move when Rowan heard voices. Not close, but not distant either. Men talking, maybe 300 yards away, sound carrying through the snow-muffled landscape. He caught fragments. Check the camps, and fresh tracks before the snow. Silas's men. Had to be. Nobody else would be searching abandoned mining camps in a blizzard. Tessa heard it too. Her hand went to her pistol, eyes scanning for escape routes. Can we outrun them? She whispered. Not in this snow. Not with exhausted horses and a baby. Rowan made a decision that was probably stupid, but felt necessary. We split up. That's insane. You take Clara and head northeast. Stay off the main trails, use the tree cover. I'll lead them southwest, make them think we're running for civilization. They'll kill you. They'll try, but I know this country better than whoever Silas sent, and one rider can move faster than 3. He pulled the wrapped evidence from his saddlebag, handed it to Tessa. You get this to Gideon Shaw. That's what matters. The proof, the testimony, the justice for Lenora, and all the other families. And what about Clara's father? Her father already failed her once by trusting the wrong people. This is me fixing that mistake. Rowan looked at his daughter, wrapped warm in her sling against Tessa's chest, and felt his throat tighten. Keep her safe, whatever it takes. Rowan, no arguments. You said it yourself. Everything's a gamble now. This is me playing the odds. He turned his mare toward the southwest trail. Give me a 5-minute head start, then ride hard northeast. Don't stop. Don't look back. Don't try to help if you hear gunfire. That's a terrible plan. You have a better one? Tessa's expression said she didn't, which was all the confirmation Rowan needed. He urged his mare into motion, deliberately riding loud enough to leave clear tracks in the fresh snow. The voices behind him changed tone. Someone had spotted movement, shouts, the sound of horses being mounted quickly. Then pursuit, exactly as he'd intended. Rowan pushed his tired mare into a canter, following a trail that wound between rock formations and through sparse forest. The snow was coming down heavier now, reducing visibility to maybe 50 yards. Good. Let them chase shadows and waste energy while Tessa put distance between herself and danger. He'd made it perhaps a mile when the first shot rang out. The bullet hit a tree trunk to his left, spraying bark. Warning shot or bad aim, hard to tell. Rowan pulled his rifle and fired back without really aiming, just making noise to keep their attention on him. 3 riders emerged from the snow behind him. 2 he didn't recognize, probably hired guns from town, and Frank Dutton, who'd been at Red Hollow with Silas. Frank was shouting something, words lost in wind and distance. Rowan turned his mare sharply, leaving the trail and plunging into deeper snow between trees. Risky move. The horse could stumble, could break a leg in hidden obstacles beneath the powder. But it forced his pursuers to make the same risky choice or give up the chase. They followed. Of course they did. Whatever Silas was paying, it was enough to make dangerous riding seem worthwhile. The terrain grew rougher, climbing toward a ridge that Rowan remembered from hunting trips years back. If he could reach the top, there were multiple descent routes that would let him disappear into the valley beyond. Big if, given how tired the mare was and how close the pursuit had gotten. Another shot, closer this time. The mare screamed and stumbled but didn't go down. Rowan felt wetness on his hand when he touched her neck, blood from a grazing wound. Not deep, but painful enough to slow her further. "Come on, girl," he urged. "Just a little more." The ridge was maybe 200 yards ahead, visible through breaks in the snow as a dark line against gray sky. The mare was laboring now, breath coming in harsh gasps, but she kept moving with the determination that good horses showed when they trusted their rider. 100 yards. Frank and the others were maybe 50 yards back, close enough that Rowan could hear them shouting to each other about angles of approach and cutting off escape routes. 50 yards to the ridge, the mare stumbled badly, nearly going down. Rowan fought to keep her upright, feeling her legs shake with effort. 25 yards. They weren't going to make it. Rowan pulled the mare to a stop behind a cluster of boulders that offered some cover and dismounted, rifle in hand. If this was where it ended, at least he'd bought Tessa time. At least Clara was riding away from danger instead of toward it. At least Lenora's evidence would reach someone who could act on it. Frank and the 2 hired guns pulled up at a distance, staying mounted but spreading out to flank his position. Smart tactics. They knew he was cornered. "Rowan," Frank called out, "don't make this harder than it needs to be." Hard seems appropriate given that you're helping a child murderer. "I'm helping my employer. What he does on his own time isn't my concern." "You really believe that? You can help kill a 7-month-old baby and then go home and sleep easy because it was just business?" Frank's expression flickered, some emotion that might have been shame or might have been indigestion. "Mr. Boone says you're unstable, that the woman traveling with you is dangerous, that you're putting your daughter at risk. And you believe him. I believe he pays my wages and treats his people fair, more than most bosses do out here. He murdered his way to a land empire, Frank. Killed babies so their families would sell property cheap. Your employer is a monster who hides behind manners and good management. That's what the crazy woman told you. That's what the evidence proves. Ledgers showing payments to Dr. Crow, letters discussing murder timelines, financial records connecting every dead baby to property Silas purchased through shell companies." Rowan kept his rifle trained on Frank, knowing the other 2 were probably trying to circle around behind him. "But you don't care about evidence, do you? You're just following orders." "I'm doing my job. Your job is helping murder children. My job is bringing you back to the ranch so Dr. Crow can treat your sick daughter before she dies in the wilderness." "Claire's not sick anymore. Hasn't been since we stopped dosing her with Crow's poison." That landed differently than the other accusations. Frank's certainty wavered visibly. "Poison? Laudanum doses strong enough to kill a grown man, fed to a 7-month-old baby 4 times daily. Combined with overheating and isolation to suppress her body's ability to fight. That's not medicine, Frank. That's slow murder made to look like natural causes." One of the hired guns, a lean man with a scar across his jaw, spoke up. "Frank, we getting paid to sit here talking?" "Shut up, Garrett." Frank's attention stayed on Rowan. "You're saying Dr. Crow was killing that baby on purpose. I'm saying Silas paid him to. Same way he paid Crow to kill Thomas Webb's grandson and Morrison's heir, and probably a dozen other infants across the territory. Also, Silas could buy their family's land cheap when grief and medical bills made them desperate." "That's..." Frank trailed off, working through implications he clearly didn't want to accept. "That's what you've been helping with. Maybe you didn't know the full scope. Maybe you just followed orders without asking questions, but now you know. So what are you going to do about it? The second hired gun, younger and nervous looking, shifted in his saddle. This wasn't what we signed on for. You said it was just bringing back a distraught father, nothing about baby killing. It's not true, Frank said, but his voice lacked conviction. Rowan's grief crazy, making up stories. Then why did Silas send 3 armed men to hunt down one unarmed father and a healer? Rowan lowered his rifle slightly, gambling on the uncertainty he saw in Frank's eyes. If this was really about helping Clara, why not send Dr. Crow and medical supplies? Why send guns? Silence except for wind and snow. The 3 mounted men looked at each other, something passing between them that might have been doubt or might have been the beginning of mutiny. Then Garrett reached for his weapon. Rowan fired first, pure instinct. The bullet caught Garrett in the shoulder and knocked him from his saddle. He hit the snow screaming, gun flying loose. Frank and the young one drew simultaneously but didn't shoot, frozen in that moment between intent and action where everything could still go multiple directions. "Don't," Rowan said, already levering another round into the chamber. "I don't want to kill you, but I absolutely will if you make me choose between your lives and my daughter's." "You just shot Garrett," the young one said, voice shaking. "Garrett tried to shoot me first. That's how this works." Rowan kept the rifle steady despite his own fear making his hands want to shake. "Frank, you know me. Known me for 8 years. You really think I'd shoot an unarmed man without cause?" Frank's gun hand wavered. "I think you're capable of anything when your family's threatened." "Exactly. So ask yourself, what kind of man threatens a baby? And what kind of man are you for following him?" More silence. Garrett was still moaning in the snow, clutching his shoulder. The wound wasn't fatal, but it needed attention soon. "We take Garrett and ride back," Frank said finally. "Tell Silas we lost you in the snow. That's the deal. I want your word you won't follow the woman and baby. You have it. Say it proper." Frank holstered his weapon slowly. "I give my word that we won't pursue Tessa Vale or the Mercer baby. We'll tend to Garrett and report that we lost your trail." He paused. "But Rowan, Silas has other men, more loyal, less conflicted. They'll keep hunting." "Let them try." The young one had already dismounted to help Garrett, wrapping the wound with cloth from his saddlebag. Frank sat his horse a moment longer, looking at Rowan with something that might have been regret or might have been calculation. "For what it's worth," Frank said, "I hope you're wrong about all this. And if I'm right, then I hope that baby makes it somewhere safe, because nobody deserves what you're describing." They rode away slowly, Garrett slung across the young one's saddle and moaning with every step. Rowan waited until they disappeared into the snow before allowing himself to shake properly. The rush of adrenaline was fading, leaving him weak and sick. He'd shot a man. First time in his life he'd actually pulled the trigger with intent to hit human flesh. The fact that Garrett had been reaching for his gun first didn't make the memory any easier to carry. The mare was still bleeding from her neck wound. Rowan cleaned it as best he could with snow and cloth, knowing it wasn't enough but lacking better options. She accepted his ministrations with the patience of animals who'd given up expecting comfort. "I'm sorry," he told her. "You deserved better than this." The horse nuzzled his hand, looking for treats that didn't exist. Rowan mounted up and turned northeast, following the direction Tessa had taken hours earlier. Her tracks were mostly covered by fresh snow, which meant his were being covered too. Good for avoiding Silas's other hunters. Bad for finding Tessa and Clara in wilderness that stretched for hundreds of miles. He rode through afternoon and into evening, stopping only when the mare physically couldn't continue. No sign of Tessa. No sign of pursuit either, which was small comfort. That night he made camp in a cave that smelled like bear but appeared abandoned. No fire. Too risky. Just cold rations and colder rest while the mare stood nearby. Too exhausted even to forage for grass under the snow. Rowan pulled Lenore's wedding ring from his pocket, the gold circle Tessa had returned to him. He'd carried it since Red Hollow, unable to put it down or put it away. Physical proof that his wife had existed, had loved him, had died trying to protect their daughter from dangers he hadn't believed existed. "I'm trying," he whispered to the ring, to Lenore's memory, to the empty cave. "I know I failed you before, but I'm trying to make it right." The ring had no answers, just cold metal and memories. He slept poorly, waking every hour to check for threats that didn't materialize. When dawn came gray and grudging, he forced himself up and moving despite every muscle screaming protest. The mare was worse. She'd developed a limp overnight, probably from pushing too hard on bad ground. Rowan examined her leg and found heat and swelling around the right front knee. Not broken, but badly strained. She might make another day if he walked instead of rode, or she might collapse halfway through the morning and leave him stranded. He chose walking. The mare had earned that much consideration. They made slow progress through snow that had accumulated another 6 inches overnight. Rowan's boots were soaked through within an hour, his feet going numb with cold that seeped up through his legs and settled in his bones. This was how people died in the mountains, not dramatically, not fighting, just slowly losing the ability to maintain body heat until they sat down to rest and never got up again. Midday brought a break in the weather. Weak sunlight filtered through clouds, not providing warmth, but at least offering visibility beyond 50 feet. Rowan climbed a ridge to survey the landscape and spotted smoke rising from a valley maybe 2 miles east. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant people. Could be friendly, could be hostile, could be Tessa and Clara, or could be Silas's men. Only one way to find out. He led the limping mare down into the valley, following a frozen creek bed that provided easier walking than fighting through deep snow between trees. The smoke source turned out to be a small homestead, single cabin, barn, corral, with a few head of cattle looking miserable in the weather. A woman emerged as Rowan approached, rifle in hand but not raised. She was maybe 50, hard-faced in the way frontier women got when life wore down everything except survival instinct. "Help you," she called out. "Looking for 2 people. Woman traveling with a baby, probably came through here yesterday or this morning." The woman's expression didn't change. "Why you looking?" "I'm the baby's father. Name's Rowan Mercer. The woman's helping protect my daughter from men who want her dead." "That's a story?" "It's the truth. Truth and stories aren't always different out here." The woman lowered her rifle slightly. "You got proof you're who you say?" Rowan pulled out Lenore's ring. "This was my wife's wedding band. She died investigating the men who are hunting my daughter now. The woman traveling with Clara, with my baby, is named Tessa Vale. She's a healer. Brought my wife's ring to me along with evidence about murders across the territory." The woman studied him for a long moment, reading whatever she saw in his face or posture or desperation. Then she jerked her head toward the cabin. "They're inside. Woman said someone might come looking, said to shoot first if it was a well-dressed man with silver hair. You don't match that description." Relief hit so hard Rowan nearly fell. "They're all right? Baby's healthy, woman's exhausted, both of them sleeping last I checked." The homesteader finally lowered her rifle completely. "Name's Evelyn Hart. Lost my own baby 4 years back, under Dr. Crow's care." The name clicked. Evelyn Hart, mentioned in Lenore's notes as one of the families connected to suspicious infant death and land transfer. "I'm sorry," Rowan said. "Save your sorry. Help me understand what's happening." Evelyn gestured toward the barn. "Put your horse up first. She looks half dead." Rowan settled the mare in the barn, giving her water and what little grain Evelyn could spare. Then he followed the homesteader to the cabin, stepping into warmth and the smell of cooking food and the sight of Tessa asleep in a chair near the fire with Clara nestled against her chest. Both of them breathing, both of them alive. He'd done it, bought them enough time to reach safety, at least temporarily. Tessa woke as the door closed, hand going to her pistol before she registered who'd entered. "Rowan? Surprised?" "Honestly? Yes. Figured you'd be dead or captured by now. Had some luck, and some help from Frank Dutton's conscience." He moved to where he could see Clara properly. The baby was deeply asleep, looking healthier than she had in weeks. "How is she?" "Thriving. Eating well, no fever, breathing clear. Another few days and you'd never know she'd been sick." Tessa shifted carefully, not wanting to wake Clara. "Evelyn's been generous with her hospitality." "Evelyn lost her own baby," the homesteader said from near the stove where she was tending soup. "Reading your wife's notes made some things clear that I'd been too grieving to see before." "Your husband's accident," Rowan said, remembering the connection, "and the land sale. Weren't no accident. I see that now. Silas Boone visited 3 times in the month before the tree fell on Marcus, talking about how hard it would be to manage a timber claim alone with a baby, how opportunities existed elsewhere if we wanted to sell. Evelyn's voice stayed level, but her hand gripped the ladle hard enough to make her knuckles white. Month after Marcus died, my baby girl took sick. Dr. Crow attended her daily, gave her medicine that made her sleepy, told me not to disturb her rest. And when she finally passed, Silas was there within a week offering to buy the claim at a price that seemed generous only because I was desperate to leave everything behind. I'm sorry you lost them both. Sorry doesn't bring them back, but justice might give them peace. Evelyn ladled soup into bowls, handed one to Rowan. Your woman explained what you're trying to do, getting evidence to the territorial investigator, making Silas answer for his crimes. That's the plan. Plans are fine, but you'll need more than 3 people and a baby to pull it off. Evelyn settled into a chair. Silas has money, connections, men loyal to him across 3 territories. What do you have? The truth. The truth gets buried regular out here when powerful men want it hidden. Then we make sure it can't be buried. Rowan looked at Tessa. How far to Blackwater Station? 2 more days hard travel, less if we can get fresh horses. I have horses, Evelyn said. And I know others who lost children suspicious ways, families who sold land to Silas or his companies after tragedy struck. Some of them might be willing to ride with you, provide witnesses, support your testimony. That's dangerous for them. Living with buried children is dangerous too, just in different ways. Evelyn met his eyes. You want to bring Silas down, you'll need numbers. People willing to stand in front of judges and lawmen and say what happened to their families. That woman's evidence is valuable, but human voices carry weight that papers don't. Rowan thought about it, about turning this desperate flight into something more organized, more powerful, recruiting the families Silas had victimized, giving them chance at justice instead of just survival. How long would that take? To gather them? Maybe a day if I ride to the nearest homesteads personally. Evelyn's expression was grim but determined. We've all been carrying this alone, thinking we were crazy for suspecting foul play, knowing we had no proof, no way to fight back against respected men with legitimate-looking business dealings. But if there's finally evidence, finally someone willing to stand against them publicly, they'll come, Tessa finished. People who've been silenced will talk if given the opportunity. Clara woke and started fussing. Tessa handed her to Rowan, who held his daughter carefully while she blinked up at him with clear, alert eyes that saw everything. Hey, sweetheart, he said softly. You're getting so much better. Clara grabbed his finger, grip surprisingly strong. She made a sound that wasn't quite a word, but felt like communication, like she was telling him something important in a language he almost understood. What do you think? Rowan asked her. Should we gather an army and take down the bad men? Clara gurgled. I'll take that as yes. He looked at Evelyn, at Tessa, at the warm cabin that represented temporary safety in a wilderness full of threats. Outside, snow was falling again. Somewhere out there, Silas was hunting them with resources and manpower and the confidence of a man who'd gotten away with murder for years. But maybe, just maybe, the hunter was about to become the hunted. All right, Rowan said. We gather the families, we ride to Blackwater Station together, and we make sure Gideon Shaw hears every single voice that Silas tried to silence. Evelyn smiled, and it was the hardest expression Rowan had ever seen. Then I'll start riding at dawn. You rest, recover, prepare, because when we move, we'll need to move fast and strong. That night, safe behind Evelyn's walls with Clara sleeping peacefully and Tessa maintaining watch, Rowan finally let himself believe they might actually survive this, might actually achieve something beyond mere escape, might actually make Lenore's death mean something. Outside, the snow kept falling, burying old tracks and old lies under clean white silence. But inside, the voices were gathering, and soon, very soon, they would be loud enough to shake the whole territory. They came in ones and twos over the next 30 hours, appearing out of the winter landscape like ghosts given sudden substance. Evelyn had ridden hard to the scattered homesteads, carrying word that someone was finally ready to stand against Silas Boone with evidence that couldn't be dismissed as grief or paranoia. The response was stronger than Rowan had dared hope. The first to arrive was a man named Jacob Morrison, the cattle baron whose grandson was currently sick under Dr. Crow's care. He rode in just after noon the day following Evelyn's departure, his face haggard and his hand shaking as he dismounted. Is it true? He asked before even entering the cabin. You have proof that Crow's killing my grandson on purpose? Rowan met him in the doorway, Clara in his arms. I have ledgers showing payments to Crow corresponding to your grandson's illness timeline. Letters discussing the Morrison situation and how it required patience. Financial records showing Silas planning to purchase your land holdings once you're forced to sell. Morrison's knees buckled. He caught himself on the doorframe, breathing hard. I knew. Part of me knew something wasn't right. But everyone said I was just scared, just projecting my fears onto a sick baby. The doctor seemed so confident, so professional. That's how they work. Respectability is camouflage. Rowan stepped aside to let Morrison enter. How bad is your grandson now? Bad. Same symptoms you described. The excessive sleeping, the shallow breathing, the way he stopped responding to stimulation. Morrison's voice cracked. My daughter's been frantic. I've been negotiating with Silas about selling the northern pastures because medical bills are mounting and the baby needs specialists and… He stopped, understanding flooding his expression. There are no specialists, Tessa said from near the fire, where she was organizing medical supplies. Just more of Crow's poison until your grandson dies and your daughter's grief makes her unable to fight the land sale. How do I stop it? Pull the baby from Crow's care immediately. Find a real doctor or a frontier healer who knows what actual medicine looks like. Expect the withdrawal to be rough. That much laudanum doesn't leave a system easily. Morrison scrubbed his face with both hands. If I do that, Silas will know I suspect something. He probably already knows, Rowan said. The fact that you're here means you talked to Evelyn, which means you heard about our evidence. Silas has eyes everywhere. Assume he's aware and plan accordingly. I can't fight him alone. You're not alone anymore. That's the point of gathering everyone. Next came a widow named Sarah Patterson, who'd lost twin daughters 3 years earlier. She arrived with her brother, both of them armed and both of them carrying the kind of cold fury that came from prolonged grief finally finding a target. She had documents with her, the contract Silas's company had used to purchase her late husband's mining claims. The suspiciously low price highlighted in ink that had faded but not disappeared. I knew, she said simply, spreading the papers on Evelyn's table. I knew those babies didn't just die of winter fever. They were healthy 1 week, sick the next, gone within a month. Dr. Crow attended them daily, always with that same calm voice saying healing took time. I'm sorry, Rowan offered. Sorry's worthless. Justice is what I need. Sarah's eyes were dry but fierce. You tell me how to hurt the men who killed my daughters, and I'll do whatever's required. By nightfall, 6 families had assembled in and around Evelyn's homestead. Some had lost children. Some had children currently sick under suspicious circumstances. All of them had sold or were being pressured to sell land to companies connected to Silas. The cabin couldn't hold everyone, so they set up tents and shelters in the barn, creating a makeshift camp of the grieving and the angry. Rowan stood in the barn's doorway watching them settle in, feeling the weight of their trust and their expectations. These people had come because he'd promised evidence and action. If he failed, if Silas managed to bury the truth again, they'd go home to buried children and stolen land with nothing changed except deeper wounds. You look terrified, Tessa observed, appearing beside him with Clara bundled against the cold. I am terrified. I'm a rancher, not a revolutionary. I don't know how to lead people into battle against a man who's been winning this war for years. You don't have to lead them into battle. You just have to lead them to someone who can enforce the law. Tessa adjusted Clara's blanket. Gideon Shaw has the authority. You just need to get these people in front of him before Silas can silence them. How do we even know Shaw will listen? Because your wife trusted him, and because men don't become territorial investigators by ignoring evidence when it's literally delivered to their doorstep by a dozen witnesses. Morrison approached from the barn's interior, his expression troubled. We have a problem. Just one? Rowan asked. Carl Webb's here, from your ranch. Rowan's hand went to his pistol. Where? Rode in about 10 minutes ago while you were outside. Says he needs to talk to you urgently. Says it's about Silas and Dr. Crow and something that happened this morning. Could be a trap. Could be. But he came alone and unarmed. Evelyn's brother is watching him in the cabin. Rowan handed Clara to Tessa and went inside, moving carefully in case this was exactly the ambush it might be. Carl sat at the table with Evelyn's brother's rifle pointed at his back, looking exhausted and frightened in equal measure. Don't shoot, Carl said immediately. I'm not here to cause trouble. Then why are you here? Because Dr. Crow's dead and Silas is blaming you for it. The words hit like cold water. Rowan had expected pursuit, expected violence, expected Silas to hunt them across the territory. He hadn't expected this particular move. How did Crow die? Overdose. Laudanum, from what they're saying. Found him this morning in his office. Empty bottle beside him. Carl's hands shook slightly on the table. But here's the thing. Before he died, he wrote a confession. Pages of it. All about how he'd been poisoning babies under Silas's orders. How the guilt had been eating him alive. How he couldn't live with what he'd done. That's convenient, Tessa said from the doorway. Right when we have evidence against both of them, the doctor suddenly develops a conscience. I know how it sounds, but the confession is real. I saw it. Detailed accounts of every baby, every dose of medicine, every instruction Silas gave him about maintaining the illnesses without causing immediate death. Carl looked at Rowan directly. It's everything you'd need to prove the conspiracy. Except it's being used to frame me, Rowan finished. Silas is telling everyone you confronted Crow, threatened him, drove him to suicide with wild accusations. Says the confession is just the ravings of a guilt-racked man who'd rather die than face your vengeance for Clara's illness. Carl's expression was miserable. He's got half the territory convinced you've gone mad with grief. That you kidnapped your own daughter from proper medical care. That you're dangerous and need to be stopped before you hurt anyone else. Morrison swore quietly. Sarah Patterson's brother checked his rifle. Evelyn just shook her head like this was exactly what she'd expected. Silas is smart, she said. Turn the evidence into a weapon against his accusers. Make the confession support his narrative instead of destroying it. How many men does he have? Rowan asked Carl. Maybe 15 loyal hands from the ranch, plus hired guns from town. Could be 25 armed riders looking for you by now. Looking where? Everywhere. He's got groups covering all the main trails to Blackwater Station, offering rewards for information about a dangerous man traveling with a woman and baby. Carl hesitated. There's wanted notices going up. You're being described as armed and unstable. $500 for information leading to your apprehension. $500 was serious money. Enough to make frontier families consider betraying a stranger regardless of the circumstances. Enough to turn every town and trading post into potential danger. Why are you telling me this? Rowan asked. Why not collect the reward yourself? Because Frank Dutton told me what really happened when you shot Garrett, about the ledgers you found, the evidence connecting Silas to murdered babies, about how you could have killed all three of them but chose not to. Carl's jaw tightened. I've worked for Silas for 6 years. Thought he was a good man, a fair boss. But I've also watched him push families to sell land after tragedies. Seen him at funerals offering deals that seemed generous until you thought about the timing. And I've wondered. Wondering's not the same as acting. No, but Frank said something before he left to tend Garrett. He said if Silas really was killing babies for profit, then everyone who followed his orders was complicit in murder. That ate at me all night. Carl looked around the cabin at the assembled families. So I'm here. Probably getting myself killed. Definitely burning every bridge I have. But I'm here telling you what I know and offering to help however I can. Rowan studied the ranch hand, looking for deception or hidden agenda. Carl just looked tired and scared and like a man who'd made a hard choice and wasn't sure it was the right one yet. You can start by drawing us a map, Rowan said finally. Show where Silas has his patrols positioned, what routes are being watched, where we might be able to slip through. Carl nodded and accepted the paper and pencil Evelyn provided. While he sketched, the families gathered closer, watching their chances of reaching Blackwater Station shift and recalculate with each marked position. He's got the main eastern trail completely covered, Carl said, marking 3 positions. North and south routes have lighter patrols, but they're checking everyone who passes. The only route he's not watching heavily is through Red Hollow Crossing. Because it's suicide, Morrison said. That ravine bridge barely handles 1 rider at a time, and in winter it's iced over and dangerous as hell. Exactly. Silas figures nobody would risk it, especially not with a baby and multiple families. Carl marked the crossing on the map. But if you could get across, you'd have open trail to Blackwater with minimal chance of interception. And if the bridge collapses, we all die, Sarah Patterson said flatly. There's that, Carl admitted. Rowan looked at the map, at the impossible geography and the calculated risks. Red Hollow Crossing was where Lenora had supposedly died, where her horse had been found wandering, where he discovered the scrap of her riding coat. Going back there felt like closing some kind of circle, appropriate in a grim way. "How long to reach the crossing?" he asked.
From here? Maybe 8 hours if you push the pace. You'd arrive at dark, which is either terrible timing or perfect timing, depending on how you feel about crossing an icy bridge in pitch black. Terrible, several people said simultaneously. But possible, Evelyn added. We cross at night. Anyone watching won't see us until we're already committed. By the time Silas realizes we didn't take the main trails, we'll be halfway to Blackwater.
"That's assuming we all make it across without falling to our deaths," Sarah's brother pointed out. "Nothing about this is safe," Tessa said, still holding Clara near the door. "But staying here waiting for Silas to find us isn't safe either. At least crossing the ravine is action instead of hoping our luck holds." The families talked among themselves, voices overlapping as they weighed risks against the alternative of giving up and going home to the silence of lost children. Rowan let them debate, knowing this had to be their choice. He could lead them toward confrontation with Silas, but he couldn't force them to follow if the danger felt too great. It was Jacob Morrison who broke the stalemate. "My grandson is dying right now. Today, this moment, while we sit here calculating odds. Every hour we delay is another dose of poison in his system." He stood, addressing the room. "I'm riding for Red Hollow Crossing tonight. Anyone who wants to come with me is welcome. Anyone who doesn't, I understand. But I'm done watching powerful men hurt children while I do nothing." Sarah Patterson stood next. Then Evelyn. Then a young couple who'd lost their daughter the previous winter. Within minutes, everyone was standing, committing to the crossing despite the danger. Carl looked at them with something like awe. "You're all insane." "Probably," Rowan agreed. "But we're insane together, which counts for something." They prepared through the afternoon, checking weapons and supplies, redistributing weight to the strongest horses, organizing into groups that could cross the bridge one at a time without overloading the ancient structure. Tessa fashioned a better sling for Clara that would keep the baby secure, even if they had to move fast or fight. "She's been so quiet," Rowan observed, watching his daughter sleep peacefully despite the chaos around her. "Almost like she knows we need her cooperation." "Babies are resilient in ways adults forget," Tessa said. "She's been through worse than a winter ride. This is just uncomfortable, not life-threatening." "Yet." "Optimism, Rowan. Try it sometime." They rode out as the sun touched the western horizon, 15 riders carrying evidence and grief and determination in equal measure. Carl led them through routes he knew from ranch work, staying off main trails and using creek beds and forest cover to avoid casual observation. The temperature dropped fast after sunset. Clara woke and fussed briefly before Tessa got her settled again with nursing and warm blankets. The sound of a baby crying seemed impossibly loud in the quiet wilderness, but nobody complained. They'd all come because of children, dead ones, dying ones, the possibility of saving the ones who still had chance. 2 hours into the ride, they spotted riders in the distance, Silas's patrol moving parallel to them, maybe half a mile away. Everyone went silent, hands on weapons, waiting to see if they'd been noticed. The patrol continued past without changing direction. Close call, but not disaster. They pressed on. Red Hollow. Crossing appeared through the darkness like something from a nightmare. The ravine was maybe 70 feet across and twice that deep, the wooden bridge spanning it looking far too fragile in the moonlight. Ice coated everything, making the planks shine like glass. "That's suicide," someone whispered. "That's our route," Rowan corrected. He dismounted and walked to the bridge's edge, testing the first few planks with his weight. They held, but they creaked in ways that suggested structural integrity was more hope than certainty. Carl moved beside him. "I'll cross first, test the footing, see where the ice is worst." "Why you?" "Because I'm the reason you know about this route. If it kills someone, should be me." Before Rowan could argue, Carl was leading his horse onto the bridge, moving carefully, weight distributed to minimize stress on any single plank. The bridge swayed slightly, protesting. Everyone on solid ground held their breath. Carl made it halfway across. 3/4. Then fully over, turning to wave from the far side. "One at a time," Rowan called quietly. "Slow and steady. If the bridge starts to fail, cut your horse loose and save yourself." Sarah Patterson went next, her brother watching from the near side with his rifle ready, like he could somehow shoot the danger away. She made it across looking pale but intact. Morrison followed, then Evelyn. One by one, the families crossed the deadly span while Rowan's heart tried to hammer its way out of his chest. Every creak of wood, every sway of the bridge felt like imminent disaster. Tessa went second to last, Clara strapped tight to her chest. Rowan watched every step, unable to breathe properly until they were safely across. Then it was his turn, the last one, leading his tired mare onto ice-slicked planks above a killing drop. The bridge felt different with no one ahead of him, more unstable, more willing to surrender to gravity and age. His mare sensed the danger and balked, pulling back from the first step. "Come on, girl," Rowan urged. "Everyone else made it. We can too." The horse finally stepped forward, trusting him despite her fear. They made it 20 feet, 40. The center span where the bridge sagged lowest and the planks looked most worn. That's when he heard horses behind him. Rowan turned and saw Silas sitting his black gelding at the far edge of the ravine, maybe a dozen armed men arrayed behind him. His former foreman looked calm despite the circumstances, like he'd expected exactly this scenario. "Rowan," Silas called across the distance. "This is foolish even for you." "Keep moving," Tessa shouted from the far side. "Don't stop." But Rowan had stopped, because Silas was dismounting, walking toward the bridge entrance with his hands raised in a gesture of peaceful intent. "I'm not here to fight," Silas continued. "I'm here to offer you one last chance to end this without more people dying. People are already dead, babies you murdered for profit. Babies who died of natural causes while I made profitable business decisions. There's no crime in being opportunistic." Silas stepped onto the bridge, testing it the same way Rowan had. "But there is a crime in kidnapping your own child from medical care, in shooting ranch hands, in stealing property and running from legitimate authority. The only authority I'm running to is Gideon Shaw. Shaw's not in Blackwater anymore. Got called to territorial capital 3 days ago for an emergency. Even if you reach the station, there will be no one there to help you." Silas took another step onto the bridge. "It's over, Rowan. You've lost. Come back with me now, and we can work something out. Dr. Crow's confession gives you leverage. We can negotiate terms." "Negotiate what? How many more babies you get to kill before someone stops you? Negotiate your freedom, Clara's safety, a quiet life somewhere far from here where you can grieve in peace and never think about Iron Ridge again." Another step. Silas was maybe 30 feet away now, close enough that Rowan could see his expression clearly in the moonlight. "All I need is the evidence you stole. The ledgers, the letters, Lenora's research. Give me that, and you can disappear with your daughter. I'll even provide money for relocation." Behind Silas, his men had dismounted and were spreading across the near side of the ravine. Not moving onto the bridge yet, but ready to if Silas gave the signal. "You killed my wife," Rowan said quietly. "I removed an obstacle, just like I've removed others who threatened profitable opportunities." Silas's tone remained conversational, almost friendly. "Lenora was smart, I'll give her that. She figured out the pattern faster than I expected, but she made the mistake of thinking justice mattered more than survival. Don't make the same mistake. Justice does matter more." "To whom?" "The dead babies don't care. Their families eventually move on. The territory keeps developing regardless of who owns which parcels of land." Silas spread his hands. "I'm not a monster, Rowan. I'm just a businessman who understands that resources flow to those capable of using them properly. Weak heirs squander valuable land. I ensure it goes to people who'll develop it productively. By murdering children. By accelerating inevitable outcomes. Most of those babies would have died anyway. Frontier infant mortality is brutal. I simply ensured their deaths served a larger purpose." The casual evil of it made Rowan's stomach turn. This was the man he'd trusted for 15 years. The man he'd considered a friend. And underneath the competence and the calm management had always been this: the absolute conviction that human life could be reduced to cost-benefit calculation. "Last chance," Silas said. "The evidence for your freedom. Everyone goes home alive." Rowan looked back at the far side of the ravine where Tessa stood holding Clara, where the families waited with their grief and their anger and their hope that someone would finally make things right. Then he looked at Silas, at the armed men behind him, at the bridge between them that represented both escape and enormous risk. "No,"
Rowan said.
Excuse me? No deal. No negotiation. No quiet disappearance. Rowan took a deliberate step backward toward the far side. You're going to answer for every baby you killed, every family you destroyed, every life you treated as nothing more than opportunity. Silas's expression hardened. You're making this much more difficult than necessary. Good. You murdered my wife and tried to kill my daughter. Difficult seems appropriate. Take him, Silas ordered his men. They started onto the bridge, 4 armed riders moving carefully but with clear intent. The structure groaned under the added weight, planks creaking ominously. Rowan pulled his pistol and fired at the bridge surface directly in front of the advancing men. The bullet splintered wood, making them pull up short. Next shot goes through someone, Rowan warned. Stay back. You can't shoot us all, one of the hired guns said. No, but I can shoot the bridge supports and drop everyone into the ravine. That stopped them. Destroying the bridge would trap Rowan on his side while stranding Silas and his men on theirs, but it would also make the crossing completely impassable. Nobody would be following anyone through Red Hollow after that. You're bluffing, Silas said.
Am I? You murdered Lenora. You tried to murder Clara. You've spent years killing babies for profit. What exactly do I have to lose by bringing this bridge down? Silas studied him across the distance, calculation visible in his expression. Then he smiled, and it was the coldest thing Rowan had ever seen. Nothing, Silas admitted, which is what makes you dangerous. He turned to his men. Get back. Let him cross.
The hired guns retreated reluctantly. Rowan backed toward the far side, guns still trained on the bridge supports, not trusting Silas's sudden cooperation. He made it to solid ground, and immediately several hands grabbed him, pulling him away from the edge. Morrison was there, and Carl, and Sarah's brother, all of them armed and watching the far side where Silas stood. Why did he let you go? Morrison asked. Because he's not done, Rowan said. He's just changing tactics. Sure enough, Silas called across the ravine one more time. You have a 2-day head start. After that, I'm coming for you with everything I have. And when I catch you, and I will catch you, there won't be any more negotiations or mercy or chances to surrender. Looking forward to it, Rowan called back. They mounted up and rode hard into darkness, leaving Red Hollow Crossing behind. Rowan risked one look back and saw Silas still standing at the bridge edge, backlit by his men's torches, watching them disappear into the wilderness. The hunt was still on, but the prey had teeth now, and numbers, and evidence that couldn't be buried as long as they stayed alive long enough to deliver it. Clara started crying as they rode, protesting the cold and the movement and the general unfairness of being 7 months old in a nightmare. Tessa soothed her while maintaining pace, mother skills and survival skills blurring together. How far to Blackwater? Sarah Patterson asked. 1.5 days if we don't stop, Carl answered, assuming Shaw is actually there despite what Silas said. And if he's not? Nobody answered that, because if Shaw wasn't there, if they'd risked everything to reach help that didn't exist, then Silas would hunt them down, and the evidence would disappear, and the babies would keep dying, and nothing would change. So they rode like Shaw was waiting, like justice was possible, like the world still rewarded courage and punished evil. They rode like their lives depended on it, because they did. Dawn broke cold and clear over terrain that looked like the world had forgotten how to be gentle. They'd been riding for 14 straight hours, stopping only twice to rest the horses and let Tessa tend to Clara. The baby had cried herself hoarse somewhere around hour T8, and now just made small, miserable sounds that broke Rowan's heart more than the screaming had. How much further? Morrison asked, his voice raw from cold and exhaustion. Another 4 hours maybe, Carl said. Blackwater Station sits in a valley just past that ridge line. The ridge looked impossibly far away. Rowan's mare was stumbling every few steps now, past the point where determination could substitute for rest. Most of the other horses weren't much better. If Silas caught them now, there'd be no outrunning anything. We need to stop, Tessa said. It wasn't a suggestion. We're too close, Rowan protested. We're too dead if we don't. These horses can't make another 4 hours. Clara needs proper warmth and feeding, and half these people are going to fall out of their saddles from exhaustion before we see that valley. Tessa's tone allowed no argument. 1 hour. Find shelter. Build small fires. Let everyone recover enough to actually function when we reach Blackwater. Rowan wanted to argue, But looking at the group, he saw the truth of her assessment. Sarah Patterson was swaying in her saddle, eyes half closed. Morrison looked gray-faced and shaking. Even the younger riders showed signs of dangerous fatigue. They found a cluster of rock formations that provided windbreak and minimal cover. The horses were tended first. Water from melted snow. What little grain remained divided among them. Then people collapsed where they stood, too tired to maintain watch properly. Rowan knew they should post guards, knew Silas could appear at any moment, but his own body was screaming for rest and Clara needed attention, and the exhaustion was like physical weight pressing him down. "I'll take first watch," Carl volunteered. "I'm used to ranch hours. This is nothing." It was clearly something, given how Carl's hands shook as he checked his rifle, but Rowan accepted the offer gratefully. He found Tessa with Clara near one of the small fires, the baby finally warm enough to stop the distressed sounds. "She's dehydrated," Tessa said quietly, "and I'm worried about the cold affecting her recovery. Another full day of this, and we might lose the progress we've made." "We're almost there." "Almost isn't there. And Shaw might not even be in Blackwater like Silas said." Tessa looked at him with tired eyes. "What's the plan if we arrive and there's no territorial investigator to hear our evidence?" "Then we find whoever's in charge locally and make them listen." "Local authority is probably bought by Silas. That's how men like him operate, control the law in their territory so they're essentially untouchable. Then we go further, keep riding until we find someone honest. While Silas hunts us and Clara gets sicker and these families lose faith that justice is possible?" Tessa shook her head. "There has to be a line where we admit this might not work. The line is when Clara's safe and Silas is answering for his crimes. Everything before that is just obstacles." Spoken like a man who hasn't accepted he might lose. "I've already lost my wife. I've watched my daughter nearly die. I've discovered that 15 years of friendship was manipulation designed to position me for exploitation." Rowan's voice stayed low, but intense. "I've lost enough. I'm not losing this too." Tessa didn't respond immediately. She adjusted Clara's blankets, made sure the baby was comfortable, then looked at Rowan with something between sympathy and exasperation. "Stubbornness isn't the same as strength," she said finally. "Sometimes accepting reality is braver than fighting impossible odds. And sometimes impossible odds are just what cowards call difficult challenges. That's the kind of thing people say right before they get themselves killed. Then I'll die having tried instead of living knowing I surrendered." Clara made a small sound between them, not quite a cry, but not contentment either. Just a baby noise that reminded them both what they were actually fighting for. Not pride or revenge or abstract justice. A 7-month-old girl who deserved to grow up in a world where powerful men couldn't murder children for profit. Rowan slept fitfully for maybe an hour, waking every few minutes to check for threats that didn't materialize. When Carl shook him awake for real, the sun was higher and the camp was already stirring. "Riders approaching from the south," Carl said quietly. "Maybe a mile out. Can't tell if it's Silas or just travelers." Everyone mounted up with the grim efficiency of people who'd been expecting this. Weapons were checked. Clara was secured in her sling, and they moved out before the approaching riders could close the distance. The final push toward Blackwater Station was brutal. The terrain climbed steadily, forcing exhausted horses to work harder while cold wind tore at exposed skin. Behind them, the Southern riders kept pace, close enough to be visible, but not close enough to identify clearly. "They're definitely following us," Morrison said, glancing back. "We're heading to the same destination," Sarah's brother offered, without conviction. Nobody believed in coincidence anymore, not after everything they'd seen and survived. Blackwater Station appeared as they crested the final ridge. A collection of buildings scattered across a valley floor, smoke rising from chimneys, the normal rhythms of frontier settlement visible even from distance. Rowan felt something unclench in his chest. Civilization. Witnesses. The possibility of safety. They rode down the slope at dangerous speed, horses sliding on loose rock, people clinging to saddles with whatever strength remained. The Southern riders matched their pace, no longer pretending this was anything except pursuit. The main street of Blackwater Station was quiet for mid-morning. A few people moved between buildings, conducting ordinary business. The territorial office sat at the far end near the general store, identified by a faded sign that looked like it hadn't been repainted in a decade. Rowan pulled up in front of the office and dismounted before his mare had fully stopped, nearly falling as his legs buckled from exhaustion and hours of riding. Tessa was beside him immediately, steadying him while protecting Clara from the jostle. "Get inside," she said. "I'll handle the horses." Rowan pushed through the office door into a space that smelled like wood smoke and old paper. A man sat behind a desk, maybe 60 years old, weathered face and steady eyes that had seen too much frontier violence to be shocked by much. "Help you?" the man asked. "I need to speak with Territorial Investigator Gideon Shaw. It's urgent." "Shaw's not here. Got called to Territorial Capital 2 weeks back." Rowan's heart sank. Silas had been telling the truth about that, at least. "When's he expected back?" "Not for another month, minimum. Big case involving mining fraud and murder." The man leaned back in his chair, studying Rowan with professional assessment. "I'm Deputy Marshal Warren Cole. Maybe I can help with whatever's urgent." "Are you honest?" Cole's expression didn't change. "That's a hell of a way to start a conversation." "It's a necessary question. The men chasing me have bought law enforcement before." "And what are they chasing you for?" "Because I have evidence that Silas Boone has been orchestrating infant murders across the territory to acquire land through distressed sales." Silence. Cole's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't laugh or dismiss the claim out of hand. "That's a serious accusation. I have serious evidence. Ledgers, letters, financial records, witness testimony from families whose babies died under suspicious circumstances." Rowan pulled the wrapped oilcloth package from his coat. "And I have a confession from Dr. Elias Crow detailing his role in the poisonings before he died." "Crow's dead?" "As of yesterday. Convenient timing given that we were about to expose the conspiracy." Cole stood slowly, moving to the window. "Those riders that came in behind you, that's Boone's men?" "Probably." "How many?" "I count 8. Well armed, spreading out like they're preparing to control the street." Cole turned back to Rowan. "This is going to get messy fast if what you're saying is true." "It's true. And there are 14 families outside who can testify to the pattern of deaths and land transfers. 14 families against Silas Boone's money and influence." Cole moved to a gun cabinet, unlocked it, and began loading a rifle with methodical care. "You picked a hard fight, Mr. Mercer. Rowan Mercer." "Mercer. Right. The rancher from Iron Ridge." Cole's recognition was instant. "Boone's been spreading word about you. Says you went mad with grief after your wife died. Kidnapped your sick daughter from proper medical care. Assaulted ranch hands and stole property." "He's lying. Men usually say that, regardless of whether it's true." Cole finished loading the rifle, then looked at Rowan directly. "But I've also heard of Silas Boone, known him by reputation for years, and I've noticed that families seem to have tragic luck when they own land he wants. Never had proof, never had witnesses willing to come forward, just suspicions that didn't quite add up to actionable cases. Now you have proof and witnesses. If they're real and they hold up under scrutiny." Cole moved toward the door. "Let's see what Mr. Boone has to say about all this." They stepped outside together. Silas had arrived with his men, all of them mounted and armed, forming a loose semicircle in the street. The families from Evelyn's homestead had gathered near the territorial office, creating a defensive cluster with Tessa and Clara at the center. Townspeople had stopped what they were doing to watch the confrontation develop. This was frontier entertainment, the kind of drama that became stories told for years afterward, assuming anyone survived to tell them. Silas sat his black gelding calmly, looking every inch the respected businessman despite days of hard riding. He saw Cole and nodded respectfully. "Marshal Cole, thank goodness. This man," gesturing at Rowan, "has kidnapped his infant daughter and fled from legitimate law enforcement. I'm here to ensure the child is returned to proper medical care before she dies from exposure and neglect." "That's so?" Cole's tone was professionally neutral. "It is. The baby was under Dr. Crow's care for serious illness. Mr. Mercer, unstable with grief over his wife's death, interfered with treatment and abducted the child with help from an unlicensed frontier woman who's been filling his head with dangerous conspiracy theories." "The conspiracy is real," Rowan said, "and I have evidence. Evidence you stole during an illegal break-in to my property." Silas's expression remained calm, but his voice carried an edge now. "I've been patient with Rowan because I understand grief does terrible things to rational thinking, but his actions have endangered his daughter's life. As his friend and foreman, I'm obligated to intervene before tragedy becomes worse."
Morrison stepped forward from the crowd. I'm Jacob Morrison, owner of the Morrison cattle operation. My grandson is currently dying under Dr. Crow's care using the same methods that nearly killed Mr. Mercer's daughter. I'm here to testify that Silas Boone has been pressuring me to sell land while my family's distracted by medical crisis. I've made legitimate business offers, Silas said smoothly. Mr. Morrison is free to decline. The fact that he's experiencing family tragedy doesn't make normal commerce into conspiracy. Sarah Patterson spoke next. My twin daughters died 3 years ago under Dr. Crow's treatment. Within months, Silas's development company had purchased my late husband's mining claims at below market value. I was told it was fair price given my circumstances. It was fair price for a widow who needed quick cash to relocate, Silas countered. I'm not responsible for providing charity. I paid what the property was worth. More families spoke up, one after another, telling stories of sick babies and land sales and Silas's convenient appearances during crisis moments. Each story sounded damning in isolation, but Silas had explanations for everything. Legitimate business, tragic coincidence, the natural hardships of frontier life being misinterpreted by grieving people looking for someone to blame. Cole listened to it all, expression unreadable. When the testimonies finished, he looked at Rowan. The evidence you mentioned, let me see it. Rowan unwrapped the oilcloth and handed over the ledgers and letters. Cole read through them slowly while the street held its collective breath. Minutes passed. The only sounds were wind, horses stamping, and the rustle of pages. Finally, Cole looked up. These ledgers show payments corresponding to the dates those babies died. The letters discuss situations requiring extended care, and this one, holding up the letter Tessa had found, explicitly mentions Mrs. Mercer and recommends handling the situation personally. Circumstantial, Silas said. Business records and vague correspondence don't prove murder. They prove that I kept careful accounts, and Dr. Crow provided medical services I sometimes helped finance for families in need. They prove you paid Crow to poison babies, Rowan said. They prove nothing except that you're desperate to blame someone for tragedies that have natural explanations. Silas's composure was infuriating. Marshal Cole, I'm asking you to take custody of that child and return her to proper care before this man's delusions kill her. Cole looked at Clara, awake now in Tessa's arms and looking healthier than most 7-month-olds who'd spent days traveling through winter wilderness. Then he looked at the families gathered in support of Rowan's claims, then at Silas and his armed men. Here's what's going to happen, Cole said finally. Everyone's going to dismount, disarm, and step away from their horses. We're going to conduct this discussion inside like civilized people, instead of having a gunfight in the street that kills bystanders. I don't answer to local marshals, Silas said. My authority comes from territorial contracts and property rights that supersedes. Your authority comes from money and influence, same as everyone else's. But in Blackwater Station, I'm the law. So you'll dismount and disarm, or you'll ride out and I'll send word to Shaw about everything I've heard today. Cole's hand rested casually near his sidearm. Your choice, Mr. Boone. The street went very quiet. Silas's men looked at their employer, waiting for signals. The families looked at Cole, hoping he was actually as honest as he seemed. Rowan held his breath, knowing everything could still collapse into violence. Silas smiled. Of course, Marshal. I'm happy to cooperate with legitimate authority. He dismounted smoothly, his men following his lead. Weapons were handed over to Cole's deputy, who'd emerged from a side building. Everyone filed into the territorial office, which was nowhere near large enough for this many people, but somehow accommodated them anyway through frontier logic that said important things happened regardless of available space. Cole positioned himself behind his desk with the evidence spread before him. Mr. Boone, you're accused of orchestrating murders for financial gain. How do you plead? Not guilty, obviously. This is a conspiracy by disgruntled former business partners and a grief-addled man who's desperately seeking someone to blame for his wife's accidental death. Mrs. Mercer's death wasn't accidental, Rowan said. She was murdered because she discovered the pattern of baby deaths and land transfers. She died in a riding accident during a blizzard. Tragic, but not criminal. She died at Red Hollow Crossing, where she was supposedly meeting someone who had proof of your crimes. That's not coincidence. It's exactly coincidence. The kind grieving minds transform into conspiracy because accepting random tragedy is harder than believing in evil plots. Silas looked at Cole. Marshal, you seem like a reasonable man. Look at what you have.
Business records that could mean anything, letters with vague language and testimony from people who've suffered losses and want compensation. Is that really enough to charge a respected businessman with serial murder? Cole didn't answer immediately. He reread the ledgers, studied the letters, looked at the gathered families. Rowan could see him calculating odds and jurisdiction and the political nightmare of accusing someone as connected as Silas without ironclad proof. "It's enough to warrant investigation," Cole said finally. "I'm holding you for questioning while I send word to Territorial Investigator Shaw. He can review the evidence and make a determination about formal charges." "On what authority?" "You're a deputy marshal in a minor settlement. I have territorial contracts and property rights that—" "On the authority of multiple witness testimonies regarding suspicious deaths and your own ledgers showing financial benefit from those deaths." "That's called probable cause, Mr. Boone. You might not like it, but it's legal." Silas's calm facade cracked slightly. "This is political persecution. I have friends in the territorial government who will hear about this overreach." "I'm sure they will. But until they intervene, you're staying in Blackwater Station under my custody." Cole gestured to his deputy. "Put him in the holding cell. Anyone who objects gets to join him." For a moment, Rowan thought Silas's men might actually fight. They were 8 armed riders against 1 deputy marshal and whatever support the families could provide. The math favored violence. Then one of Silas's men stepped forward and set his rifle on Cole's desk. "I'm out. Whatever this is, I don't get paid enough to shoot lawmen over it." Another man followed, then another. Within minutes, half of Silas's crew had disarmed and stepped aside, leaving only 4 loyal hands still willing to fight. Silas looked at the deserters with undisguised contempt. "Cowards." "Practical," one of them corrected. "You said this was about bringing back a sick baby. Turns out it's about covering up murdered children. That's a line I won't cross." The remaining loyal men looked at each other, realizing they were now outnumbered by people who very much wanted to see Silas face justice. The math had changed. Violence was no longer an option that ended well for anyone. "Stand down," Silas told them quietly. "This isn't over." "It is for today," Cole said. He moved around the desk and took Silas by the arm, guiding him toward the holding cell with professional courtesy that didn't quite mask the satisfaction underneath. "You'll have opportunity to contact your lawyers. They can argue jurisdiction and evidence with Investigator Shaw when he arrives." The cell door closed with a sound of absolute finality. Rowan felt something release in his chest, tension that had been building for days, maybe weeks. Silas was contained, not convicted, not punished, but stopped, unable to hurt anyone else while the legal process ground forward. Clara started crying, sharp and demanding. Tessa took her outside where the air was fresher and the crowd less oppressive. Rowan followed, suddenly exhausted beyond anything he'd ever experienced. "We did it," Morrison said, appearing beside him on the street. "We actually got him arrested." "We got him detained," Rowan corrected. "Arrested requires formal charges. Convicted requires trial and evidence that holds up under legal scrutiny." "You're determined not to celebrate even small victories, aren't you?" "I'm determined not to assume this is over until Silas is in prison and Clara's safe and every family has justice." But even as he said it, Rowan felt a smile trying to form. They'd survived. They'd delivered the evidence. They'd found someone willing to at least investigate instead of dismissing the claims as frontier paranoia. It was something. Maybe not everything, but definitely something. Tessa returned with Clara, the baby calmer now, and looking around at Blackwater Station with the serious attention infants gave to new environments. She reached for Rowan, and he took her carefully, feeling the solid, warm weight of his daughter in his arms. "Hey, sweetheart," he said quietly. "You're safe now. We're all safe." Clara grabbed his finger, grip strong and certain. She looked at him with eyes that were Lenora's eyes, that would grow up to see a world where her mother's courage had changed things, where powerful men faced consequences, where justice was possible even when it seemed impossible. The families dispersed slowly, finding accommodations in Blackwater's boarding house and making plans to stay until Shaw arrived to take formal statements. Morrison rode out immediately to fetch his grandson from Dr. Crow's successor, determined to end the poisoning before it could finish what it had started. Sarah Patterson stayed close to Cole's office, watching Silas through the cell window like she was afraid he'd disappear if she looked away. That night, Rowan sat in a rented room with Tessa and Clara, finally warm and fed and safe behind locked doors. Clara had nursed and fallen asleep with the boneless contentment of babies who felt secure. Tessa dozed in a chair near the small stove, exhausted beyond polite conversation. Rowan pulled out Lenora's wedding ring, the gold circle he'd been carrying since Tessa first returned it. He'd been thinking about what to do with it, whether to keep it as memorial or pass it to Clara when she was older, or bury it as symbol of letting go. But looking at it now, feeling the weight of everything it represented, he realized the ring wasn't about holding on or letting go. It was about remembering, about honoring the woman who'd seen danger when he'd only seen friendship, who'd fought battles he hadn't known were happening, who'd died protecting their daughter from threats he'd been too blind to recognize. "I'm sorry I didn't listen," he whispered to the ring, to Lenora's memory, to the empty space where his wife should have been. "I'm sorry I trusted the wrong people and doubted you, but I'm trying to finish what you started, trying to make your death mean something." The ring had no answers, just gold and memory, and the weight of promises kept and promises broken. Rowan set it on the table beside Claire's makeshift bed, positioning it where the lamplight made it glow. Maybe someday he'd find words to explain to his daughter who her mother had been. The courage, the intelligence, the determination to protect the vulnerable, even when everyone said she was imagining threats. For now, the ring would have to speak for itself. Evidence of love, evidence of sacrifice, evidence that some battles were worth fighting even when the odds seemed impossible. The trial came 6 weeks later after Gideon Shaw returned and spent 3 weeks reviewing evidence and taking depositions. Silas's lawyers fought jurisdiction and challenged witness credibility and argued that business acumen wasn't criminal just because it profited from tragedy. They were expensive lawyers, skilled at creating reasonable doubt. But Shaw was a territorial investigator who'd spent 20 years prosecuting frontier crimes that seemed unprovable until someone bothered to actually investigate. He traced Silas's shell companies through 3 territories, connected financial transfers to infant death dates with precision that made coincidence impossible, and found 4 more families willing to testify about suspicious medical care and convenient land offers. Dr. Crow's confession, despite Silas's attempts to dismiss it as suicide ravings, was corroborated by pharmacy records showing laudanum purchases far exceeding any legitimate medical practice. Shaw even found the doctor's private journal detailing his increasing guilt and Silas's pressure to continue the poisonings. The evidence mounted like stones building a wall that couldn't be climbed over or dismissed. 15 babies dead across 5 years. 13 families pressured into selling land. Over $40,000 in profit for Silas through property acquisitions that looked legitimate only if you didn't examine the pattern. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning a verdict. Guilty on 8 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty on 12 counts of fraud. Guilty on numerous counts of corruption and criminal enterprise. The judge sentenced Silas Boone to hang, then commuted it to life imprisonment given his age and the complexity of proving direct culpability for deaths that had been disguised as natural causes. Rowan attended every day of the trial, Clara in his arms or with Tessa nearby. He watched Silas's composure crack slowly under the weight of evidence and testimony. Watched the man who'd spent 15 years manipulating him finally face consequences. On the final day, as they led Silas away in chains, the former foreman looked at Rowan across the courtroom. No words passed between them, just recognition that the friendship had always been fiction, that trust had been weaponized, that the game was finally over. Rowan felt nothing, no satisfaction, no vindication, no closure, just exhaustion and relief that this particular nightmare was ending. Months later, back at Iron Ridge Ranch with new management and honest workers, Rowan stood in Clara's nursery watching her take her first wobbly steps. 9 months old now, healthy and curious and utterly unaware that she'd nearly died before learning to walk. Tessa had stayed. Not as a romantic replacement for Lenora, that would have been wrong and they both knew it, but as something else. Partner, maybe fellow survivor. The person who'd helped save Clara when no one else would listen to a frontier healer's warnings about respected doctors and trusted foremen. "She's getting strong," Tessa observed from the doorway. "Like her mother. Like both parents, probably. You fought pretty hard, too." "I was slow to start. Lenora was fighting before I even knew there was a battle. But you finished it. That counts for something." Clara stumbled and fell, landing on her padded bottom with a surprised expression. She looked at Rowan like asking whether this was catastrophe or just temporary setback. He smiled and she decided it was temporary, pushing herself up to try again. That resilience, the determination to keep trying after falling, felt like the only meaningful inheritance he could give her. Not land, not money, not protection from every hardship, just the example of getting up after being knocked down, of fighting for what mattered even when powerful people said it was impossible. Outside, spring was returning to the frontier. Snow melting, grass growing, the world renewing itself with indifference to human suffering and triumph both. Iron Ridge Ranch would continue. The families Silas had victimized would heal slowly, or not heal at all, carrying their losses forward into whatever futures they could build. And Clara would grow up knowing that her mother had died fighting monsters disguised as friends. That sometimes the most dangerous threats wore respectable faces and spoke in calm voices and hid their predation behind manners and good business sense. That justice was possible but never guaranteed, never easy, never achieved without cost. She'd grow up knowing that her father had failed and learned and ultimately stood against darkness, not because he was brave or certain or strong, but because the alternative was surrendering to people who treated human life as something to be exploited for profit. The frontier had always been hard country. Hard on the weak, hard on the unlucky, hard on anyone who thought safety came from walls or laws or the protective distance of civilization. But it was also country where determined people could change things, where one woman's investigation could expose years of calculated evil, where grieving families could become an army of witnesses, where truth could still matter if enough people were willing to fight for it. Rowan picked up Clara and held her close, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. She was alive, healthy, safe. The monsters who'd tried to kill her were imprisoned or dead. The conspiracy that had seemed invincible had been torn apart by evidence and courage, and the stubborn refusal to accept that powerful men were above consequences. It wasn't a perfect ending. Lenora was still dead. The murdered babies couldn't be brought back. The families still carried grief that no justice could fully heal. But it was an ending where evil had been stopped and survivors had found their voices, and a 7-month-old baby had lived instead of becoming another casualty in Silas Boone's accounting ledgers. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes survival and justice and the chance to build something better were the only victories the frontier offered. And sometimes, just sometimes, those victories were exactly what the people fighting for them had needed all along. Clara laughed suddenly, a pure sound of infant joy that had nothing to do with trials or evidence or dead mothers, just happiness at being alive and held and safe in a world that had tried very hard to kill her. Rowan laughed too, feeling the weight of the past months finally lifting. They'd survived, they'd won, they'd changed things, and that in the end was the only story worth telling, that ordinary people facing impossible odds had found the courage to stand up, speak out, and refuse to let evil hide behind respectability. The frontier would keep being hard, but it would be a little less cruel because they'd fought back. And for Clara, for all the children who'd come after her, that would have to be legacy enough.